I'd like to welcome everybody. I'm going to call to order this Town of Sydney Regular Committee of the Whole meeting on Monday, February 7th, 2022. Myself, Sarah Duncan, in the chair, Councillor Scott Garnett here with me in the chambers, and Mayor Cliff McNeil-Smith on Zoom, along with Councillors Peter Wainwright, Councillor Terry O'Keefe, Barbara Fallett, and Chad Rantoul. I'd like to welcome everybody for our budget meeting and continue on with the territorial acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge we're on the traditional territories of the Wasanich people, and that the town of Sydney has committed to trying to work with the Wasanich people on mutual interests. One of the things that I'd like to bring to light at this time is our a recent business partnership with the Wasanich, the Saywoot, locally, and that's just a great example of how both our residents and the town would like to do reconciliation. Normally we would have a public participation period at this time, as we've added that to our committee of the whole meetings, but since we only have the one item on the agenda, we will be going on to the special public participation opportunity. So that will be after we do the next orders of business. And while it says that we have the draft financial plan being presented before special participation, speakers will in fact be given a chance to speak before the staff report, and I will let you know at that time. So our next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda, and we have a recommendation that the agenda be approved.
I'll move approval of the agenda.
Okay, so moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thanks. Okay, call the question. All in favor? Oh, sorry, I have a comment. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just thinking that, you know, after the presentation by Mr. Hick of the updated presentation of the financial plan, later on the agenda, we have additional budget notes also from Mr. Hick under 8AV. And, you know, it's, I think any questions we might have under that report would certainly pertain following the presentation Mr. Hick will make. And so my suggestion is that we just move that report up to right after the presentation and in essence be able to ask any question with regards to the budget, whether it's that report, his presentation, or otherwise.
Okay.
I'll second that.
I have that moved and seconded. Call the question on the agenda as amended. All in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. We will go on to the next item, the approval of minutes from the regular committee of the whole meeting of January 17th. We have a recommendation.
I'll move receipt.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. I'll call the question. All in favor? All right, it's unanimous. So we don't have, well, we do have presentations, but they're related to the financial plan. We have no development applications. We're on to the staff reports, and we'll start with the special public participation opportunity. And we have 3 speakers today. We will start with, we have Jane Batty and Sheila Fay. Sheila, I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. And they are together, so we will let them start speaking together. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. Actually, I was going to speak first, and then Sheila was going to take another 4 minutes, but we'll see how this works out.
Oh, no, absolutely. You can each take 4 minutes, but yeah, decide amongst yourselves who goes first and how you divide.
Okay, well, I'm going to go first as I'm sitting right here with the microphone in my face. So thank you very much. So Mayor McNeil, acting manager and acting mayor, city councilors, Sydney councilors, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening on the proposed Off-Leash Park on Resthaven Drive. My name is Jane Batty, and I've owned a townhouse in Sydney on Resthaven Drive since 2006. I'm also a dog owner, and I'm not in favor of the proposed park and you putting money into the dog park. I know in 2018 and 19, you did extensive community input, and planning was done by a consulting firm, I believe, commissioned by the town of Sydney. And a report went to council, provided, I think, March 2019, recommending next steps and financial implications. So based on the community feedback, the recommendations for Resthaven Park was a harbor management plan, enhancing the wildlife habitat, expanding the playground facilities to include a nature park, restore and enhance the shoreline to include native plantings, as well as a sheltered picnic area, which all of this, I understand, was incorporated into the park's master plan. Now, I know that a park's master plan is a living document, but where did it go astray? There was no mention of the dog park. And Resthaven is an oak park, is an open green space with waterfront walkway, an emphasis on public leisure use. It features views and access to the Shoal Harbor Migratory Bird Sanctuary, as well as the marine walkway. And for those of you that are probably not aware, or maybe are aware, that the bird sanctuary was established in April of 1931, which is over 90 years ago. And it is frequented by international and local bird watchers, photographers who are out there spotting rare birds. And obviously they knew something 90 years ago, which it looks to me like we're considering to abandon for an off-leash park. So Resthaven Park is a family park, and one of the most important things of all to, I believe, the town of Sydney and where you're going is it's a multi-generational park. And practically any time of the day you see an activity going on, whether it's a young family playing on the swings or playground, grandparents pushing their grandchildren in strollers, or kids tobogganing down the hill on their crazy carpets on a snowy winter day. It is a park that is used. And just this afternoon, there were a group of I don't know what grade they were actually, but school kids with their teachers out enjoying the park. And on warmer days in the evenings, families picnic together, and later on, there's older children or kids, teenagers out there playing ball and other games. And all day long, community members, including seniors, are out walking, many with small dogs or some with a little larger dogs, but they're enjoying the incredible harbor view, and it's their community. During the spring and summer, I've witnessed groups bringing their chairs and coffee cups and sitting in small groups chatting. Even book clubs meet. The park has allowed many opportunities as we navigate through this pandemic. And I suspect that once people have discovered the park, as they did over the last 2 summers, that they will continue participating with their activities in the park. And yes, there are many dogs being walked in the park, and nearly always on a leash, as the owners recognize the importance of the delicate balance between wildlife and nature. Resthaven Park is a community park enjoyed by all, even the four-legged raccoons. So I do ask that you consider not doing a dog park and putting your funding into what was originally planned and I believe supported by all. Thank you, and I will now turn this all over to Sheila Fay.
Thanks, Jane, and thank you, Council, for allowing us the chance to speak to this. And yes, you did pronounce my last name properly. I've lived in Sydney now for the last 9 years and have used this park extensively as I have young grandchildren, and they are here with me a lot. And I love living in this area, and I love living just off Resthaven Drive. It's just a wonderful, wonderful location for everyone. I firmly believe that my tax dollars are for people. And the parks are especially important for children and for people of all ages to use and feel really comfortable with. We do have a very small play area for children, and it's not really inclusive, and it doesn't accommodate children basically over the age of 5. It's really limited. And I know that Council was looking into expanding this park and making it a really interactive, exciting, and inclusive park for families and youth. I'm assuming now you've basically changed your mind, so I'm not quite sure why that has happened. We have a lot of big dogs that do run in the park on a daily basis off leash, and that actually is a danger to children and to seniors who, sometimes we just don't have our whereabouts with us and we don't see the big dogs coming and they charge into you. And it's not the dog's fault. It's just simply that they're a dog. And so I think that we need to be very concerned about that. I don't want the dogs here unleashed. Having them leashed, I have no problem with that, but having them unleashed. And my other concern with that is being beside a bird sanctuary has a huge, huge issue for me. And Jane's covered so many aspects of this problem that we feel that we're going to have. I think we should also consider the number of raccoons, and we have otters that reside in this area. And if we're living in a neighborhood where it is considered a town or a small city, and that those kind of things are the things that keep us in touch with our environment. And I think those are important to keep here. And I don't want to see them lost. This it's just too important. Now, I do believe over the years, the town of Sydney has been really careful with our tax dollars. And it's very much appreciated, actually. But doing an off leash park for dogs in this pristine waterfront area just doesn't seem to be a thing of necessity at all. There's lots of other dog parks around that people can get to, they're easily accessible, and they're a better location all the way around. And certainly aren't close to a big road like Resthaven and the busy traffic, etc. So I think there's lots of other places that the people with their dogs can go and be really comfortable. I'd like to see this park enhanced for children of all ages. And I often wonder if you'd ever taken any idea of some of the parks that happened in New Zealand. And I did mention it to the people that were looking at enhancing the dog park when we started first looking at this a couple of years ago. And I said, you need to go online and look at some of these parks they've got in New Zealand. They're just amazing and so inclusive. They're inclusive for infants, little water parks that they have, for instance, right up to
Sheila, I'm
teenagers,
afraid
and they all
you've
are
reached your
inclusive.
4 minutes. So if you
Oh
could
dear.
kind of
Thank you.
yeah,
And thank you for allowing us to have the time.
oh, thank you. Thanks. We'll go Bill, if you're still with us.
I am here. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. Mayor and councillors and staff, congratulations on a great job over the last few years, to be precise, with the COVID and the pandemic and the management. I want to speak tonight specifically about the budget as a more of a holistic comment. Obviously, there's details in there which will you have recommendations from staff, and you have to deliberate and make the decisions on. From my perspective, as a citizen and a homeowner and a business owner in Sydney, particularly a business that relates to the climate emergency and what has to be done to protect our coastal oceans and our coastal peoples. What I see is, and what I understand, is that the average individual doesn't have a big role to play in addressing the climate emergency. And this is unfortunate, but this is I believe to be true. Our first line of defense against this dynamic change which we see is our municipalities and the workers that work every day to protect our natural resources, our environment, our infrastructure and our buildings, and that do the planning. They're a first line of defense in what we have to do as a society over the course of the next 2 decades to bring this climate crisis to some kind of a plan for control and getting ourselves back to where we need to be for our kids and our grandkids. So as a result of that, I see that we're asking for just a sub 5% change in taxes this year, an increase in taxes. And I've read with some interest the proposals for the various elements of that tax base. Let me say holistically that we're demanding our municipal governments plan effectively for the future. We're demanding that they take into consideration our changing environment as particularly manifest in the coastal zone, of which Sydney has frontline defense against. So it is an imperative that we task the folks that are frontline, our municipal workers, our planners. It's imperative that we give them the right tools to make the right decisions, with council's oversight. And in order to have those folks have the tools necessary, it costs money. They're the first line of defense. So therefore, I urge council to look at things in the broadest sense as the first role of tackling this climate emergency, by giving them the tax base, giving them the budget that they need to do the job effectively. So I'm perfectly fine as a citizen and a business owner of paying the extra taxes. It's a very, very small amount to pay for the challenge that we have in front of us. I'll leave my comments there, and I'm sure you'll make the right decision.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you to all of our speakers tonight. We will be kicking you off the video of the meeting, but you are still welcome to watch and follow along from home. And we will now move on to our presentation on our draft 2022-2026 financial plan. Are we loading up the presentation for Mr. Hick here? There we go.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Here we are at stage 2 of our process. Now, I assure you that this won't be another 75 minutes of me talking at you. It'll be, a brief introduction, and then it'll be interactive as we move through the various portions of the budget. So it'll start with a brief recap of where we stand, which will include the tax impact and additional information to support budget consideration. There was mention earlier of the staff reports that are part of the agenda, and my plan was to weave those into the presentation at the appropriate junctures. But if it's the will of council to begin by addressing one or more of those up front, we can certainly do that. But my plan, as I said, was to raise them at the appropriate time so that it's all fresh in our mind as we move on to that portion of the budget. So following the brief recap, it'll be our first consideration of the budget by area. So by that I mean the utilities, water and sewer, moving on to the supplementals and general operating, and then the capital portion of the budget, and then any other facet that council would like to go back to. As mentioned, the staff reports will be highlighted at the appropriate time, but given that the additional budget notes is a bit of everything and not just devoted to one area, perhaps it does make sense to briefly introduce that and ask if there are any questions on that.
And I'm going to have to say, Councillor Fallett, I can't see your video on, so if you have comments as we go ahead, you might have to either just cut in and say you have a comment, or use the hand raising function on your Zoom just for now.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. So to briefly introduce the report, it talks about our starting point and indicates, like we do every year, that it's only the initial draft budget, and there are opportunities throughout the process to reduce or perhaps to add to it. But adding, while we might add certain elements, we never end up at a higher point than what we started at. So we do have the ongoing impacts of COVID, which really goes back 2 years now, where we rolled back the very modest 1.79% tax increase to 0, and more significantly, we cut business taxes by 10%, knowing that in future years we would potentially have to get back to the previous taxation level through increases. Then we were lucky enough to receive the Canada BC Safe Restart Grant, which essentially saved us from having to do that and gave us 4 or 5 years to phase in the increases that we would need to get back to where we were. it essentially permitted us to keep business taxes at that lower level on what might be called a permanent basis. We have more supplemental requests this year than we typically do, and as I outlined last week or last presentation, there are ongoing impacts from the ones that were approved in 2021. In terms of the new items, I did provide a little bit of additional information about eDerms, the Electronic Data and Records Management System, which has been an initiative in the works for close to 10 years now. And we're finally at a point where we truly have to bear down and address it. We believe that the investment is fairly minimal in ensuring that we have the record-keeping capacity that we need. There's the town website redevelopment, which is phased over 2 years and may or may not cost as much as we have in the budget. It's all largely going to depend on whether or not we have to change our software for managing the website. Certainly the communications manager will be handling that in-house to the degree possible, and we don't know at this point just how extensive the work is going to be. Sea level rise adaptation, state of the environment report. Those are two items that came up through the recently updated strategic plan, and since they're fairly new, we have not yet had a chance to fully develop and scope those projects. So we do have funding in the 2023 budget as a placeholder on the assumption that the work of narrowing down the scope and the deliverables will happen in the final quarter of this year or earlier, and Council will get a chance to weigh in on the scope and the deliverables. We are asking for an additional RCMP officer, which is earmarked for early 2023. There will be more on that in the presentation. CRD Arts voluntary contribution, as indicated in the report. This was approved last year, but only for 1 year, so it's being brought back for confirmation of ongoing funding. Moving on to the capital side, once again we have a high level of expenditure on infrastructure replacement with over 11 million over the 5-year plan. We've worked hard over the last year to ensure the plan was affordable, but it will be supported by a project we'll be undertaking on a formal asset management plan, which is also a budget item, fully funded from reserves. We do have a number of park improvements in the 5-year plan. We've heard about the dog park, but there are others. And these are largely based on the Parks Master Plan, as well as the concept plans that were developed after completion of that initial document. However, we are continuing to delve deeper into the not only the master plan, but the concept plans themselves. And as they get closer to initiation, there could be a reprioritization, and council will be the ones to make that decision. I'm not going to cover all the remaining items, but if there are any questions of council at this time, I'd be happy to address them. Otherwise, perhaps they could also be asked at the appropriate juncture in the rest of the presentation.
So I'll put the question out to my colleagues if anybody has comments or questions rather at this time. And now it's Councillor Wainwright I can't see. So I think it's just everyone assume that I can't see you and use your voice to signal or the hand raising function on Zoom. Seeing and hearing nothing, I'll ask Mr. Hick to continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as mentioned, we're at stage 2 of our 3-stage process. Tonight will be the first opportunity to discuss and clarify different parts of the budget. It'll be an opportunity for in-depth discussion prior to the final deliberations, which are slated for 2 weeks and a day from tonight. It was the first opportunity for public input, but there will be another one at the next council meeting on the 14th, and then yet another at the beginning of the meeting on the 22nd. So additional staff reports are included on this agenda. Perhaps we've gone the extra mile this time and provided more info than council might be used to, but that's typical of how we operate under this council. I think this council can consider itself the most informed council that I have ever worked with. We provide, we go the extra mile to make sure you have the information you need for decision making, and we take that very seriously. So after tonight's meeting, we'll have what I hope are final budget deliberations on the 22nd, which is on a special Tuesday night meeting following the Family Day weekend. There will be an updated presentation as well as a second draft of the financial plan for consideration on the 22nd, at which time the goal will be for council to approve the financial plan as amended. So the next two slides are a bit of a rehash. I did mention these last time, and as well as covering them in my introduction on the staff report. The 2020 tax reductions are something we're still playing catch up on. Safe Restart has certainly helped in that area. It's going to give us until at least 2025 to get back to what one might call traditional taxation levels, but we also have to make up for new programs and services along the way. So keeping the tax increase too low over the next couple of years will just make the job more difficult in 2025, 26. So we did start out with a general increase of 4.98%, and that includes a number of new initiatives which have not yet been approved by council. So if they end up not being approved, our number goes down. I provided this breakdown last time showing what the impacts are to the core budget, to our incremental items, and then showing what the situation is with our offsets this year. So every 1% increase in taxes gives us only $122,000 of revenue. So that's not a lot of spending power if we're to address some of our pressing issues, such as climate change. And each 1% increase represents approximately $1.32 per month for the average residence. So 4.98% would be roughly $79 for the average residence. I like to remind council each year where the tax dollars go, and the purpose of this is to show how much impact we have on both the residential and the commercial taxpayer. So municipal taxes, the numbers we're talking about tonight, make up roughly half the tax bill for both residential and commercial, a slightly greater percentage for residential. The rest of the tax bill is made up of provincial school taxes, as well as taxes for other jurisdictions like the regional district, library, and so on. So what this chart illustrates is that we have a little bit less influence on on that commercial tax bill because we make up less than half of it. Furthermore, the commercial tax bill is not reduced by the homeowner grant, whereas the residential tax bill is. So in terms of thinking ahead to potential budget reductions as we move forward, the most likely sources for these are capital projects that are funded from taxation, and those are clearly outlined for you. Another source for reductions is tax-funded supplemental items. And the third source that comes most immediately to mind are discretionary transfers to our reserves. So you might ask, why not the operating budget for tax reductions? Well, it's mainly due to the use of surplus funding. We use $450,000 to minimize the tax impact, and we expect to cover that through operational savings and break even for the year. If we reduce the operating budget, then we're reducing the comfort level with generating those expected savings, and therefore I would also want to correspondingly reduce that surplus funding. Now, this is a slide that I added at the last minute. It won't be in the packages I sent to you, but I'll resend them just to flesh out the previous slide. So, looking at those likely sources for reductions, capital projects funded from taxation. So, how do we actually reduce the impact through that method? So, we could replace some of those tax-funded projects with other funding, such as reserves, or we can defer or cut those projects entirely. But please keep in mind that cutting it back too much will make it harder to get back to a normal level of tax-funded capital next year, and it'll just add a layer to our future challenges. So tax-funded supplementals doesn't bear further discussion. I think if there's any items that are cut, it will reduce the impact. In terms of discretionary transfer to reserves, there are only two that are worth identifying. One is our transfer to the Climate Action Reserve, which is new for this year, but it's a fairly modest $50,000, and it's a reserve that we need to build up, so I wouldn't recommend cutting that one. The only other discretionary transfer to speak of is the General Capital Reserve, which tends to be the one that along with the ferry terminal reserve are the two that suffer when we're looking to reduce the tax impact. Finally, there is one more likely source for reduction, which is to use more surplus if it comes down to it. If we've gone through the budget and we've reduced as much as we can and we're still not comfortable with the bottom line, we could choose to use more surplus, but that also has its cautions. So with that brief introduction, I would like to move to the various parts of our budget that require review, starting with utilities, moving on to supplementals, then general operations, tax-funded capital, other capital, and finally other changes council would like to consider. So we all know what our water utility pays for. It's the bulk water purchase and the operation and maintenance of our distribution system. It's funded with parcel taxes and user fees, and the
Chair,
Yep.
the mayor and myself both have our hands up,
Oh,
and I'm kind of assuming maybe you can't see them.
I can see them. I was too busy reading Mr. Hissick's report because he was still talking. But I don't know. I'm going to honor system here. Which one of you put your hands up first? Mr.
Zoom actually, as a technical point, whoever put their hand up first is the first one on the top left, and then it proceeds from there. So they all show up in order. And at any rate, if I could,
Go ahead.
the previous slide was talking about the order we would go through things. The first item being the utilities and then going on to the others. I don't mind dealing with the utility one first, but I think it would be useful if committee had a discussion of where we're interested in ending up. So if, for example, the majority of council would like to see, 2% shaved off that 4.98, that tells me we've got some serious work, and I'm going to be as creative as possible looking for, opportunities. But personally, I don't want to be that aggressive. And I just think it would be useful to get a bit of a read on what my colleagues are thinking in terms of where we'd like to end up. And if people agree, maybe we could have that chat after we deal with utilities.
Okay. I'm going to, yeah, I'm going to go to Mayor McNeil Smith before we have that chat. Now I see Councillor Fallett has her hand up as well, so I'll go to the mayor first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Wainwright, for bringing up the same as I wanted to discuss. And I think this is the first opportunity for Council to talk about the overall budget and the increase as proposed through the first presentation. And while the utility budgets don't have an increase per se, and we're usually able to make a decision without a lot of deliberation, I think it nevertheless, before we get into the different sections of the budget, should perhaps have the discussion Council Wainwright was indicating. And for me, I appreciate the hard work that not only the finance department but all departments have put into this budget. I think it's one of the more challenging budgets that I've seen in over this term and serving in a previous term. And appreciate, as Mr. Hissick outlined at the outset, that Council has been provided with a tremendous amount of information, which has been helpful to us through presentations and reports. And I think, you know, for me, I do have some questions about some of the information through the budget and through the presentations. But for me, I would like to see us try to work down to a 3.5% increase. I appreciate the comments from Mr. Hissick this year and in earlier years with regards to trying to tie budgets to inflation. But and I won't get into the discussion of how that is good or not good, but the reality, I think, is that in general, citizens and businesses, when they're looking at their household finances or their business finances, consider what the going inflation rate is and look at the various expenses, particularly when they're significant, and how much they're rising in the context of inflation. And while the annual inflation rate, while inflation has gone up recently, the annual inflation rate is anticipated to be, you know, higher than normal, higher than it has been in recent years. And I think a 3.5% increase, while it may be appearing to be aggressive, and I would agree with that comment, is something that we should work toward, and I would be prepared if we could come close to that. So I'll leave my comments there and turn to other colleagues before getting into any specifics.
Councillor Fallett, go ahead.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Councillor Wainwright, for opening up this discussion. As I've said in years past, I personally think that it's the wrong way to go around looking at our budget, is to say that where are we with our opening level? This year it's 4.98, and then to set I'm going to call it an arbitrary figure of where we're going, what we would like to see happen. I think that puts an undue pressure on the items that are in the budget. They are in the budget for a reason, either this council or previous councils. The direction of the town has made these a priority. I'm not suggesting that they should be necessarily approved because they are in the budget, but I think to look at it from a percentage basis is a challenge that is the wrong way around it. I would rather look at, is there something that individual councillors come up with and say, you know, I don't see that this needs to be in this year's budget or the budget at all. I'm looking to cut it. I would much rather look at it at the merits of what's in there than to set a figure that this is where we need to go. Thank you.
I'm going to move to Councillor Garnett and then Councillor O'Keefe after.
Thank you, Chair. I tend to agree with Councillor Fallett. I don't have a number in mind where we need to end up and how much we need to cut. I would prefer to go through the items and see what I consider something that's important that needs to stay in there, and what I would think that council or representatives on the committee feel is not as important and maybe is something that doesn't need to be in there. And that's the approach I've taken when looking at this, and that's the approach I would like to take tonight. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm of two minds of this. I totally appreciate what my colleagues, Councillor Fallett and Garnett, are saying about. I agree in the sense that we shouldn't be making decisions about the budget just on a percentage. If there's things that need to get done, things need to get done, and that's the cost. Having said that, I think we do have some flexibility in terms of how we manage spreading out those costs and that increase. For example, by using more of our surplus, and looking in more detail at some of these things. For me, I'm more inclined to would like to see us get down to 3 or 3.5%, and I would like to see us use maybe a bit more of our surplus than we've traditionally used in the past to help us get there. And while I recognize, staff's concern about, dipping into surplus might make it harder, we'll have less of a surplus next year. However, I guess what's in my mind is knowing that we perhaps have some more tax revenue coming on stream next year with, I think we've estimated fairly conservatively in terms of the amounts that we might get from the new Amazon development. We've got some other developments coming on stream as well. So I'm okay with thinking about getting down to 3 or 3.5, and maybe that's by cutting a few things that we don't think are high priority or postponing them, and possibly dipping into our surplus a bit more than we might have in the past. That's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm comfortable, I think, having the discussion around, the type of budget we'd like to end up with. I think it gives us something to work towards. I don't think it's arbitrary to suggest a percentage we're comfortable with, because I'm sure we've all given some thought into areas of the budget where we see there could be some savings, or, as Councillor O'Keefe noted, some different allocations to help us achieve that. I'm comfortable with the suggestion the mayor has made to see us work towards 3.5%. I think it would be a challenge to get beneath that level. And Mr. Collins' comments at the start of the meeting certainly resonate with me, that we need to ensure we continue to look to fund opportunities to address climate change, and I know in funding a new reserve, we're taking steps to do that. That is in our budget, and that gives us latitude to continue working towards that goal. So again, thank you, Chair. I think I'm not concerned about having that figure out of 3.5%, and I think it also allows staff, frankly, the opportunity to provide their input to work towards that goal as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go back to Councillor Wainwright now that he's heard everybody else.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't, in my opening comment, say what I thought might be, the right ending point or whatever. And I'll have to say that I agree with Councillors Fallett and Garnett that I don't think it's right to have a particular target in mind. But when I went through it, I felt that I could reasonably expect to find a way to put the tax increase 0.5% to 1% lower. So I'll simply say I would be comfortable if we got it into the, and I'll say 3.99%. But one of the factors that I'm particularly thinking about is I think we should be careful not to have the tax increase too low, because we know we've got to build it back up. We were quite aggressive cutting the tax increase to 0 and then rolling the commercial back 10%. We also want to have some room to be able to make some tax policy adjustments, which, if you shift some of the tax burden from commercial to residential, you're making it harder. I'm just thinking that if we're too aggressive on cutting, next year and the year after are going to be much more challenging. If we're modest in our reductions this year and wind up with a tax increase that's closer to the 4%, you'll have that much more flexibility next year. It'll be easier. And we know we've got a lot of other things coming down the pipe. Like, we still have that big unknown of what's going to happen with Beacon Wharf. And, you know, we've got other things. We have no idea what we're going to be spending on dealing with adaptation of our shoreline to, you know, sea level rise and that sort of stuff. So I think we've just got to be prudent and make sure that we have the resources available in the coming years. So that would be my pitch. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett, did you know? I guess I will use my time then as the chair to make the last comment. And that I'm agreeing with the councillors who are stating that they're not comfortable going towards a specific target, and that we should be looking at whether the expense is necessary or not. In my case, I trust staff not to bring forward expenses that are unnecessary. And I also, usually we've found as this council, we haven't cut anything. We've either deferred it or we've found another source of funding, and tried to be more creative than perhaps staff would have been comfortable with presenting us in the first place. And so I'm wondering, you know, that Councillor Wainwright may have found some of those places where staff would have hesitated to bring it forward, but we can do that. But I'm also nervous about finding alternative funding sources when we look at the increases for the future. You know, 9.21% is in there for the 2023 budget increase. And, you know, the difference between 0.5% coming off now by using some alternate funding source when knowing that next year staff is really going to be looking very hard probably at alternate funding sources, as well as having to cut things and probably trying to avoid cutting things. I don't feel comfortable changing things that much now. But I guess I'll see what my colleagues have. I believe Councillor O'Keefe raised a good point about the fact that the future years may not be as bad because we have conservative estimates about new funding coming online. My only concern there is that with the new funding coming online is requiring, you know, capital changes that are also going to have new costs coming up, and probably costs that we haven't necessarily fully foreseen yet. Every time we add new residences, new businesses, we require new road, you know, changes to our roads, and probably unforeseen changes to possibly our fire department staffing and our response capabilities that we're finding out all at the time, new things all the time. So I'm really hesitant about continuing to cut as aggressively as we have in the past couple of years. But thank you. I guess we'll have Mr. Hick continue on, and we're going on to utilities. Unless somebody has something they would like to say a second time. Mayor McNeil-Smith, go ahead.
Thank you to all colleagues. And I think one thing we are all in agreement on is that this budget has been carefully crafted by staff, and they do not, as Mr. Hick has stated in his opening, bring frivolous items before council. And I think where we are in agreement is that every aspect of the budget that we do consider, we need to consider on the merits of the benefits for those expenditures in our community. And as I said in my opening remarks, while I may be more comfortable in a lower rate, I also said that you know, we would want to look at all of the items and give them careful consideration. Thank you.
Thank you to all of council for providing those perspectives. It's interesting to hear. I'm not going to share with you how much we have to cut to reach various targets. I think I'll leave that for later based on the consensus that I've heard. But thank you, Mr. Mayor, for reminding me of a very important point. Something I neglected last time and I almost forgot again is I'm the one standing here in front of you doing all the talking, but There's so many people behind this budget that they should all be recognized. I'm the one who puts it together and packages it up, but each and every one of our budget managers has done a tremendous job in being responsible and bringing forward what they feel is required to provide the best level of service possible to the public within taxation constraints. So thanks to the rest of the team. The water utility, the change to the rate structure we made last year, as I reported recently, it appears to be working exactly as intended. So all I'm proposing for this year's budget is to pass on the same increase that the town is seeing for the bulk water rates, which is 3.3%. So the consumption charge, which is the charge that we pass on for the actual use of water, is expected to go up to 5.54 per 1,000 gallons, which is exactly the increase that the town is seeing on the bulk water purchase. It's just a pass-through of the CRD cost. I'll certainly open it up to any questions or comments council might have on the water budget. And once we're done with that, perhaps a resolution to approve the water budget as presented or as amended might be made. And I'll be following up with the actual rate bylaws at a subsequent meeting.
I've seen, so Councillor Garnett, followed by Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Through you to staff, Chair, thank you. Do we have an indication of how much that might affect the average household in terms of the consumption charge increase?
It'll be nominal.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, entirely based on consumption.
Mayor McNeil-Smith, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, we're on the water budget. My question is actually with sewer, but just for clarification, through you, Chair, to staff, we're looking at approving the operating and the capital water budget together or separately?
It should be together as far as the current revenue funded water capital is concerned, but when we get to the capital budget, if there are adjustments you wish to make on current revenue funded capital, that could be done at that time.
Thank you. Chair, I do have one question on the water budget, on the water capital budget. And it's the hydrant upgrades of $10,000 and tax funded for $9,000 and then $1,000 in reserve carryover. And it's something I'll bring up in the general capital budget as well, because I think there's more examples there. But this is one example where I think hydrant upgrades is the type of work that should be funded from reserves. And I've just turned to staff if they have a comment on that versus tax funded.
Sorry, I turned off the mic instead of turning it on. There's really no compelling reason why it can't be. Historically, we've funded a small amount of water and sewer capital each year from current revenues, but we don't have to continue that practice. The only thing is if we're adding something, in this case, it's a replacement, so the replacement reserve would be appropriate. But when we're adding a new piece of capital, for instance, the annual water and sewer equipment budgets, we tend not to add from within the replacement reserve. So I would advocate for keeping a small amount of current revenue for that purpose.
Well, thank you, Chair. And I would agree that if there were new hydrants, that's reasonable to be tax funded. But if we're upgrading existing hydrants, it's maybe a small distinction to be made. I think there's more examples in the general capital budget, but If there is room in the reserve, I would move a motion. I'll wait for further comment and look to make a motion to whether the staff are recommending part or all of it. I'm sorry, I would have to turn to the binder to remind myself whether the hydrant upgrades are all upgrades or there are new ones included.
I'm not sure we have a specific plan each year for which ones are going to be done at the inception of the year. But if I'm wrong, one of my colleagues can possibly address that. I do see a hand up, but I'm not sure whose.
It's Mayor McNeil-Smith still has his hand up. There's only the one, so.
There's a dude.
I don't. Chief Mickelson looks like he has suddenly shown up, so I'm guessing he can address that.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just in respect to new hydrants, typically Sydney is obviously very built out, so the vast majority of our hydrants are solely replaced due to obsolescence, and they or have small 2.5-inch discharge ports on them that are not consistent with the large 4-inch steamer ports, which we use to flow larger volumes of water now to fires today. And the vast majority of new hydrants in the town are typically funded as a result of a new development. They have a fire department connections required within 45 meters of a hydrant. And I would say the vast majority, if not all, of the new hydrants that have been added in the downtown in the last, or in the town in the last 4 or 5 years, have been as a result and paid for as a result of a new development.
Thank you, Mr. Mickelson. Mayor McNeil-Smith, would you like to make your motion now? I see no other speakers.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you to staff for the answer. So I would move that the hydrant upgrades funding, property tax portion, be moved to reserve funding.
Second.
And do I have any discussion? All right, I'll call the question. All in favor? That's unanimous.
Madam Chair, I would be prepared to move approval of the water operating and capital budget.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. I'll call the question on the approval of the water budget as amended. All in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. Carry on, Mr. Hick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Similar to water, we're also aware of what the sewer utility pays for. It's not a standalone system. The biggest part of the cost is the town share of operating the unified treatment plant, and then we operate and maintain the collection system as well. Similar to water, it's funded from parcel taxes and user fees. There is a rate structure review that is pending. We likely will not complete it this year. It's something we'll likely complete in 2023 and report to the new council on. We are still waiting for the final number from CRD about what our share of the treatment plant is going to be. I'm expecting that to decrease from the preliminary budget that they provided in November. So at this time, the sewer budget is built on a certain assumption, and if that large cost impact is reduced, then that assumption will change slightly ahead of the final budget deliberation. But the only thing that will really change is the user rate that will be in place to collect the required amount of revenue. So it is still possible to approve the sewer utilities budget tonight, knowing that the one thing that is going to be approved separately is the actual user rate. And those bylaws for water and sewer user rate will be brought forward in March. Similar to water, there is a small amount of current funding for capital projects, and it does tend to be mainly for the purchase of new equipment from year to year. So just to circle back a bit on what we did in water, so we have moved some of the capital funding from current revenues to reserve. That will mean that we're going to have to add one more thing to the replacement reserve that will need to be funded over the long term, but we'll have less capital each and every year to fund, so the two should balance off. But neither one leads to a reduction of the tax impact, because none of this is property tax funded. So with that in mind, are there any questions about the sewer utility?
Mayor McNeil-Smith, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the comments, and the last comment from Mr. Hick is that none of the capital sewer projects are property tax funded. If I turn to project 204, which is access hatches for pump stations and their upgrades, it's a budget of 59,000 and it's showing 20,000 from property tax. My comment was going to be similar than the one I made for the water budget, is that these are upgrades, and I think they're very worthy upgrades given it's dealing with confined spaces in these access points. But if you could comment just on whether it's property tax funded or not.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I apologize for the presentation. When it comes to the water and sewer, what that column represents is current revenues. In the case of the general fund, that's property tax. In the case of water and sewer funds, current revenues represent user fees from that particular year. So I realize the column heading is property tax, but it's not intended to represent that down below at the water and sewer levels.
Okay, if I may, through you, Chair, do you have further comment or concern about that being, given the nature that they're upgrades and not new, being funded through reserves?
We do have a small amount of sewer capital reserve remaining, so that could be redirected to this project. But again, it'll have no impact on property taxes, so it's robbing from Peter to pay Paul with no impact on property tax. So I would suggest just leaving it alone.
Okay, I do appreciate now that explanation with regards to current revenue versus property tax, but and while I appreciate that it doesn't affect property tax, I'm not making all of my comments this evening with regards to trying to reduce property tax. It's the principle of whether it's new or replacement upgrades. And so I will, but I will take your advice on this, and I won't make a motion. Thank you.
You know, Mr. Hick, is this do you have more to present, or is it this point? No. All right. So then we'll be looking for a motion to either to approve as presented.
I would move, Chair, to approve the sewer operating and capital budgets as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? That's unanimous. Go ahead, Mr. Hick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Moving on to the general operating fund, and this is what, in fact, is property tax funded entirely. So the major impacts were identified at the last meeting. Just a quick reminder of the largest ones, that being supplemental requests with a net increase of 254,000 over last year, plus the full impact of the 2021 additions, which have an ongoing impact. Every year we reduce our transfer to replacement reserves, and this year that adds just over 62,000 to the budget. And that includes the new contribution to the climate reserve as a supplemental item. We do have the ongoing impacts of the COVID tax reductions, as well as the benefit of the Safe Restart grants. Offsets to the increases for this year are a decrease in debt servicing, as well as less tax-funded capital. We'll cover this again in supplementals, but I do like to illustrate each year just how much of our budget is consumed by the policing costs. So we're up to $1.9 million for 2022, and that's without adding a member this year. So we've gone up considerably over the last 13 years or so, over $700,000, and this remains our largest tax impact. And to illustrate why I believe we need that additional RCMP officer starting 2023 is that this is a snapshot over the last 13 years showing what our authorized strength was in officers and what our actual billing was, and how much we saved each year, how many officers we were short in our detachment. So you'll see that over this 13-year time span, we've averaged 1.28 officers short per year, and it's been even worse over the last 5 years at almost 2 officers short on our complement. And 2021 was the worst I've ever seen. 12% of our complement was not here serving the town. The detachment commander believes that adding one more authorized member to our strength will certainly help. We'll still be short, but hopefully we won't be as short overall, and we'll be able to provide the desired level of service. Because what happens when we're under a staff complement is that certain services aren't able to operate at full capacity, whether it's speed watch or various other somewhat discretionary items. So this is discussed at length in the report, and perhaps we can cover it again when we get to the supplemental items. Community support, this is another thing I like to illustrate every year. We pay out over $1 million a year to our community partners, such as Mary Winspear, the Shaw Center, the museum, and many others. And that also has increased considerably over the last 8 years. It's more than doubled. Now, this is the first time in many years that we haven't had a major new request. It's still a fairly substantial amount, but there's nothing new on the horizon. The one item that requires a decision is the voluntary contribution to the CRD Art Service that was considered and approved last year, but only approved for 2021. It's being brought back again this year to confirm whether it was the intention of council for this to be an ongoing payment. Also last year, council decided to supplement our grant program with $30,000 from the Safe Restart program. We have 3,300 of that left unused from last year. And a question that should be asked is, do we wish to supplement this before we head into budget? So moving on to the supplemental items themselves, we've got the more significant items being 24-hour fire staffing, a downtown parking study, which we do periodically, a new transfer to the Climate Action Reserve, a human resources manager, which is the only staffing addition in the budget, and that is targeted to begin in September of this year. There's a $30,000 for a citizen satisfaction survey, which I believe I've indicated, might be one item that doesn't make sense for this upcoming year. Storm drainage alternative study, which is a mouthful and also very important to assist with our infrastructure planning this year. And then a host of smaller items totaling 109,000. And there is once again net impact from the one-time supplementals last year. Now, if there are questions about any of the supplemental items at this time, we'd be prepared to address them. And once we get through that, council is free to remove, reduce, increase, or approve any or all of the supplemental items by resolution when you're ready. If additional information is required, it'll be brought forward to the meeting on the 22nd. And any items approved for removal tonight will be removed from the second draft of the budget that you'll see on the 22nd. With that, I'll open it to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hick. So I'll look to my colleagues to see if anyone had questions. Oh, no questions on the supplemental items. Carry on. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Wainwright.
So I don't actually have questions about the supplemental items, but I think it would be appropriate if we discussed some of them. So one of the ones that I had on my list to discuss, there's 4,500 as an ongoing support for the Film Commission, and we've given them funding through our grant process on a regular basis. And in many years, we give them some extra as opposed to our sort of standard amount. This is proposing to put it in our budget essentially as a line item. And while I can potentially see some merit in doing this, I don't think this is the year to do it. We're looking for some cuts. This, granted, is quite small, but this is certainly something that's discretionary from my point of view. It could easily be deferred for a couple of years. And I guess if you'd like, I could make a motion that we cut it.
Thank you. I'll look to see if anyone else has general questions or comments, discussion about that, or sorry, about other items before we go to a motion, rather. If it's a discussion about the Film Commission, I'll wait till Councillor Wainwright makes his motion. So Councillor O'Keefe, okay, I'll go ahead and make your motion.
I'll move that we eliminate that 4,500 for the Film Commission from the budget.
Second.
All right, discussion. Go ahead, Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'm in favor of keeping it. The reason being is that's something that industry brings, I think, a significant amount of business to the town of Sydney. There's not a lot of other things that we're doing in terms of economic development, except for, we're doing our economic development strategy. I also note that there's that $3,300 surplus that we're looking for some place to put. So maybe that's how that can be funded. So I'm more inclined to support continuing with that, because I think it's something that does have a significant economic benefit to the community. Thank you.
Councillor Garnett, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I won't support removing this. I just think I've seen how much this has put Sydney on the map, and how people that I know that don't live here now know about it because of Made on Netflix, just for an example, and all the Hallmark movies that are made here. And it does have an impact, maybe not now during the pandemic, but it will once this is all done and people are traveling here in greater numbers. People talk about the community because of the movies that are made here. And so I think it's an important economic driver, and I think it's something we need to really keep. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Rintoul, go ahead. and then Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and I think if I had a better understanding of the Film Commission and the utilization of these funds, I'd probably be more supportive in seeing the additional funding as a line item. And I get Councillor Wainwright's observation with respect to this being the significance of it being a line item. It's great that Sydney has been a backdrop for so many movies and TV series, and we've been attracting that interest, I think, because we come by it honestly as a beautiful seaside iconic town. And I think with or without that $4,500, which is a pretty minor amount for a contribution, that's going to continue. Don't want to take it for granted, but I'd like to better understand how the Film Commission utilizes those funds, and I think it's incumbent on them to do that as opposed to us make this a line item. So I'll continue to listen, but I'm inclined to support the motion. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Mayor. You're muted.
Thank you, Chair. Just a bit of background. Council will recall that we received a letter from the Film Commission making this request, I believe, last fall, and we forwarded it to budget deliberations. That letter had followed a meeting that the Film Commission leadership had met with Mr. Humble and myself. And one of the things that I believe was outlined in the letter is that for reference purposes, that this level of funding being requested of Sydney is proportional to the other size municipalities and the funding that they provide, and that the revenues are used for general operating, and that the Film Commission is, unfortunately, the nature of that organization has very limited other grants from other orders of government, the province or the federal government, and relies not for a majority of its revenue, but a significant portion of its revenue from the municipalities, which, quite frankly, I think is unfortunate, but it is a reality. And I was hoping to listen tonight and maybe take a decision at our budget deliberations, but I appreciate the motion being moved, and I won't support it this evening. I appreciate the comments that initiated with Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Seeing no other discussion, I will call the question. All in favor of removing the Film Commission item from the budget? See 1, 2. Councillors Wainwright and Rintoul. All of those opposed? All right. Motion fails. Go ahead, Mr. Hick.
It's still council's floor to ask questions or make suggestions for removal, deferral. I understand it's perhaps easier to circle back to this at the end of the meeting once we've also looked at capital, because what we do in one area will impact how stern we wish to be in another area. So if council is not comfortable making decisions on any particular supplementals at this time, we can always circle back at the end.
I saw Councillor Wainwright first and then Councillor Garnett after.
Thank you, Chair. So another one that I think is worth discussion is the $30,000 citizen satisfaction survey. And staff alluded earlier this evening, made a comment that this may not be the right year to be doing that. I think that would be worth having a discussion. I saw staff's email about that this afternoon, and I have to say I agree. I think that is something that should be left for the next council to decide when they want to do that, and not have it in this year's budget.
Thank you. I'll go ahead, Councillor Garnett, and then Mayor McNeil-Smith after.
I just wanted to speak to the supplemental items, and I'm wondering, should we have this discussion with the supplemental items as they're presented in the agenda, with staff providing a report first? Would that make more sense?
Thank you, Councillor, for reminding me. I did mean to introduce some of the supporting reports. So we've got a report on the manager of HR. We have another report on the fire department staffing, and the one about general budget notes, I believe I've already sufficiently covered, but if there are additional questions, that might be a good time to ask. So can I please ask Mr. Humble to introduce the manager?
Well, I've actually got, I'm wondering if we should finish off with Mayor McNeil-Smith might have a comment on one of the other supplemental items he already had first, and then go back to Mr. Humble, perhaps.
Thank you, Chair. And my comment just on procedure is given this this supplemental item has been raised for discussion, and that it does not have a supplemental report later on the agenda, that we continue discussion with it. I'm comfortable discussing any of these supplemental items that does not have a supporting report on the agenda this evening, and then we can leave those till we get to that point. So if I might continue, Chair, with comments about the citizen satisfaction survey. And I'll actually have a question through to staff, is if they could provide an update or background on when was the last citizen satisfaction survey done, and roughly how long does it take to complete?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My recollection was that it was done in 2013, and it takes a few months to prepare questions in conjunction with council, as well as the firm that we're planning to use for the syndicated survey. At that time, it was run at a particular time of year, being the first quarter of the year. I'm not sure if that is still the case, or whether it's more flexible in terms of timing. But I would allocate 3 to 4 months from beginning of process to undertaking of the survey.
Thank you, and that's helpful, both knowing how when the last was done, but also part of the process. And my reason for the question over process is that there is the election in October of this year, and then there is the Christmas season. And I think when I think to engagement of the community, and this is one of the highest forms of engagement, is that you would want to do it at a time after the election, because people's attention will be on that, and prior to the Christmas season. And I'm not sure that leaves. I appreciate some or much of the time that it takes for the whole process is work by the consultant to develop the questions, but there would be a period of time to to engage the residents. So I'll leave my further comments there until hearing from colleagues.
Thank you. I see. Oh, Councillor Rintoul, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was inclined to leave this in the budget as currently scheduled, and in part because we've just adopted the strategic plan. We talked about the timing of the strategic priorities, and this item is certainly identified in that strategic plan. So I don't know why we'd be revisiting it tonight. Having said that, what I think is most important is that the results of this survey be used by council, this council, next council, to make changes to things like this process, and where residents identify, priorities that need to be addressed, particularly in future budgets. So if it's the consensus here that it should be delayed, I'm fine with that, but it certainly wasn't something that I was intending to do. I think it would be quite helpful for a new council to have this insight. Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I was also hoping that we would get this done this year, although I recognize we've got a lot of things on our plate to get done prior to the end of this term. Having said that, I agree with Councillor Rentoul that it would be nice for the new council to have this survey completed and done so that they can look at that perhaps as they go into strategic planning. I don't know when that would be, in maybe December of this year. So I guess it all sort of comes down to the timing of it, whether staff would see this being reasonable to complete prior to say November, December. If so, then I think it would be preferable, in my opinion, to get it done so that the new council can look at that and make some strategic plans and objectives. If we leave it for the next council, it'll probably be into the first quarter or maybe second quarter by the time it's done. So I guess, it would end up being their next strategic planning session in, what would that be, 2023, where they'd be in a position to do something. So I think I'm leaning a little bit more to let's get it done this year so that new council has it available for them. Thank you.
Mr. Humble would like to address comment.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I can appreciate council's desire to want to get it complete this year. Indeed, it was discussed at the strategic plan. I think at the time of the strategic plan, when it was initially discussed, it was Q2 of 2022, and then it was resolved to move it to Q4 of 2022. And perhaps staff should have spoke up at that time, but I think if we were given an opportunity, we would probably say that would have been that'd be a challenge. I think one of the reasons of moving it to Q4 was the high level of engagement that we're going to be undertaking, in particular with the OCP during Q2. So, certainly if it's council's direction to get it done this year, we'll do our best, but I think it's going to be a challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett, are you speaking for the second time on this one? No, okay, I'm sorry. I have lost track here. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I understand staff's concerns. I would have hoped this would have got done as well, but then reflecting Q4 election, Christmas, as you're saying, as was Councillor Wainwright, I believe, was saying, or Councillor Mayor McNeil-Smith, that it's a challenge, and to be honest, we don't know what the face of the next council is going to be, and I think maybe having a bit of time to get their feet under them before they have the results might be beneficial, and I think it might actually be better suited for their first strategic plan, or I guess they have one usually in the new year, but the real first strategic plan is in the fall of 2023 makes more sense, because at that point, if you have an entirely new council, then they've had a chance to get their bearings and an understanding of how things work, and it takes time. So I think it's important for them to be able to do that before they have to incorporate these results into planning going further into the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll just speak to it, I guess, briefly, as I see no other colleagues wishing to speak for the first time. I hadn't felt strongly enough about this to move it myself, but I'm actually quite glad that Councillor Wainwright brought it up. I am in favor of deferring this. Simply, I think our citizenry is going to be surveyed out. We've had the OCP, we've had the wharf, and then they're going to be surveyed, of course, during the election itself on who they want to be on council. And remembering what door knocking and campaigning was like, I'm pretty sure we will get most of this citizen survey for free by the new council that's coming in, and our new council will have all of this information when they arrive. It may be good to defer the citizen survey even further into the term. We'll see what the new council decides. So I'm going to look to Councillor Wainwright if you'd like to make that motion.
Sure. I'll move that we defer the citizen survey to 2023.
Second.
Any further discussion? Go ahead, Mayor McNeil-Smith. You're muted still.
I'll learn eventually. Through you, Chair, I'll turn to Council Wainwright, and would you be comfortable this being referred to strategic planning for the next council? I mean, we're just saying to 2023, but that doesn't say how it arises in 2023.
I guess it could be referred to the strategic priorities, but from the point of view of the budget, we would have to still defer it to, a subsequent year. So I think my motion to defer it to 2023 stands. And if you want to move to refer it to strategic priorities or strategic planning for the next council, that's fine. But I see that kind of separate.
Thank you, and I agree. I agree with what you've said. Speaking to the motion, I will support the motion. I was actually leaning to wanting to complete this because I think it could be of value to the next council. However, the comment from Councillor Duncan triggered the thought about the engagement, and we have perhaps some of the most significant engagement occurring with our residents in determining the future of our community, not only through the official community plan process that we'll be continuing through to the end of June, but also the adoption of a climate action plan and the adoption of an economic development plan. And I think all three of those are significant opportunities for our community to engage in the future of the community. And I think a citizen satisfaction survey certainly speaks maybe to specific services and resident desires and business desires and that sort of thing. But I think we'll be doing excellent engagement, and I'm comfortable in leaving the citizen satisfaction survey to the next term.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, I will call the question. All in favor of deferring the citizen satisfaction? Oh, sorry, Councillor Rintoul. Oh, sorry, you guys are voting already. All in favor of the motion. I'll stop describing it. Unanimous. Does anyone have further comments on the supplementals that do not have a staff report? And seeing none, Councillor Hick was giving me an indication that he thought, Councillor Mayor McNeil-Smith, go ahead.
Right, I would like to just turn to a question with regards to the town website update. And we have provided information, and there is information here for us, but just a question through the staff. In the description of this project, it speaks to a decision have to be taken through the initial consulting as to whether we update our website on the existing platform, if that's the correct term, or choosing another platform, which would be a much more significant project. And if through the preliminary work we had to move to, there was a recommendation that came before us to move to a new platform, would it be accurate to say that that would involve a significantly higher additional cost to what we're seeing in the budget now?
It's difficult to say whether it'll be more. We believe that we could find an appropriate platform within the allotted budget, but until you actually narrow down the functionality you want and start looking at a few programs, it's difficult to say. So I'm comfortable with this amount over 2 years for the time being, and this time next year we should have a better idea.
Thank you. I do have a question from staff, if they can recall when the downtown parking study, when the last downtown parking study was done. Or sorry, it says right in the report here, 2016. Sorry, I withdraw that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, unless I see no further comments, questions on the supplementals without additional reports, we will move on to item a.ii, the Staffing Manager of Human Resources, and I believe Mr. Humble is going to introduce a report for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll introduce the Human Resources report. So the intent of my staff report is to provide council, for council's consideration, the request to add a new regular full-time exempt position, being the Manager of Human Resources. So as noted in the report, the town has never had a dedicated HR staff person within our staffing complement. Thus far, we've been able to pretty much muddle through the HR function by having it being done off the sides of the corporate officers, the Director of Corporate Services, and the CAO's desks. Certainly, we've also been fortunate to have an engaged management team that have also provided additional support related to staff recruitment, job evaluations, workplace training, and succession planning. So over the last few years, however, we are witnessing increasing complexities and challenges associated with the HR-related function. This includes increasing levels of staff recruitment, workplace health and safety requirements, employee retention and attraction, as well as contract negotiations associated with two separate unions, one being CUPE Local 374, as well as the newly established Sydney IAFF, which is the International Association of Firefighters Union. And this particular union, this required the negotiation of a brand new collective agreement, which also involved considerable staff time and resources. The town currently has approximately 90 regular employees, and I strongly believe that an organization of this size and complexity would benefit greatly from attaining an HR professional to assist and provide a leadership role in dealing with HR and personnel matters. Based upon an examination of other like municipalities in the region, I think it's clear that Sydney is somewhat of an outlier in that it currently does not have a dedicated position related to HR. The staff report provides a relatively detailed list of potential duties and responsibilities associated with the Manager of HR function, and certainly there are other areas and opportunities that could also be included with this role, within this role once the job description is established. So as noted in my staff report, there are several benefits of this position, including for myself, the Director of Corporate Services, as well as the corporate officer, it would free up a significant amount of our time, thus allowing key management staff to focus on other critical needs and priorities within the organization. The position would be able to take on a more strategic HR function by proactively influencing key staffing priorities. The position would also better allow us to maintain labor code compliance, as well as mitigating our own legal risk associated with HR-related matters. We would also benefit with respect to maintaining appropriate and timely recruitment practices and performance management processes. So in summary, it's the opinion of myself and the senior management team that there would be significant value in obtaining a dedicated Manager of HR position within the organization. It would allow the organization to move forward and provide us with the ability to perform a range of necessary HR functions. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay, go ahead, Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. And I do have a question, but I'll add some comments as well. I do fully support the rationale provided in the report. And in fact, this has been an ongoing topic of discussion within the organization for some time now. The question I would like to pose to colleagues is one of timing. And we do know from the budget information that this position would be scheduled to come, is scheduled to start within the budget in September, and would have a $45,000 tax impact in 2021. my question through to staff is, well, I'll make my comment and then the question through to staff is that we've also seen through the budget information that we are having, tax impacts this year based on the decisions of our council last year with regards to staffing, in particular, the approvals we gave to increase volunteer recognition and stipends in the fire department, the addition mid-year of a climate action coordinator, and the addition about 2/3 of the way through the year of a manager of communications. And we will be seeing in 2021 the first full year impact of all of those changes. I think those were great improvements to our organization and the services provided to our community. But think that that this additional 45,000, is on top of that as well. We will be considering later this evening the significant request from the fire department on 24/7 or 24-hour staffing at the community safety building. So my question to the staff is, do staff have concerns? And this is partially reflecting the comment just earlier on the citizen satisfaction survey, where staff commented how busy the fall season would be. Would staff have any concerns if this position would start in January of 2023?
Yeah, through Madam Chair to Mayor McNeil Smith. I guess from my perspective, I think that certainly we've seen through the addition of the Climate Action Coordinator and, as you pointed out, the Communications Manager, we have benefited incredibly from having those two positions. I would say that while I've waited, or the organization has waited a significant amount of time for the manager of HR, I think it's going to be a challenge for us to wait essentially an entire year for this position. I think what we've witnessed through COVID and the challenges associated with HR policy and the work involved in addressing what's been fundamentally a moving target with respect to workplace safety and meeting those requirements. I think it's been an ongoing challenge. I think this year as well, we're going to be moving into, again, another round of contract negotiations associated with the QP 374 collective agreement, which again is going to take a significant amount of my time away from my duties and functions. So I guess from my perspective, I think waiting an entire year is a bit of a challenge, and I think if we can get the position filled in September, I think we'll be better off for it.
Thank you, Mr. Humble, and through the chair. And sorry, I must clarify my question. I'm sorry I didn't word it differently. I wasn't looking to refer this to 2023 budget deliberations, and that could certainly be inferred from what I said. What I intended to was to actually approve the new position, but for the start date, and I'm not making a motion, but for discussion is to approve it and move the start date of the position from September to January 1st, January of 2023. So it would be a postponement of starting in the position by 4 months. I don't know if Mr. Humble has further comment.
Yeah, does it alter your response, Mr. Humble?
No, not really. Thank you.
I have Councillor O'Keefe, followed by Councillor Fallett.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to support this. I know there's folks that might say, do we need another exempt person? How will a HR manager provide value? Having been an HR manager, I know the value that can be added, especially here. I think one of our major obstacles to being able to maintain service for our citizens is being able to have good qualified people on staff. And the reality is that we're in a very competitive labor market, and it's only going to get worse. Being in HR myself, we knew this was coming 20 years ago with retirement of baby boomers. And so we've started to see that. It's only going to get worse. What that means is not only fewer people to fill the jobs, but also they're taking there's an exodus of knowledge and experience as well. So it's a very competitive market. And while managers of the different departments will still need to be involved in these things, HR manager isn't going to take everything off their plate. You know, you still need to have the technical expertise, for example, of an engineering manager to hire an engineering technician. But having an HR manager, you've got somebody who can be focused on handling the administration, the process, which is a huge time consumer consumes a lot of time for managers. And also they're in a position to be thinking about maybe experimenting with some new and creative options on how to recruit, you know, tapping into maybe underrepresented populations, looking at other channels, how we can get the word out to different people. And a lot of times managers are so busy just trying to get the normal work done that it's hard for them to invest that time. The other thing where I think they add value is in terms of retention. And I think Sydney is really fortunate. The workers that I speak to that are here seem to think that it's a great place to work. But it's good to have somebody an HR manager who is focused on that and looking at, you know, new ways to engage employees and make them feel valued. And that strategic role as well that Mr. Humble mentioned, talking about having a performance management program in place and linking that to our strategic objectives. So those are all things that I think would add a lot of value to our organization. In terms of the start time, I'm happy to see it start in September. The reason being, I think it would be good for them to start at that time. A new council will be coming in a couple months later. So it's an opportunity for them to get in on the ground level with a new council and participate in strategic planning and maybe get some strategic objectives related to HR issues. So for those reasons, I'm happy to support this position. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead. It'll be Councillor Fallett, followed by Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to come at it from a completely different perspective than Councillor O'Keefe. I come out of owner-operated, self-employed perspective, so an HR position is completely foreign to me. Having said that, I also looked at the report that staff provided, and in particular, I look at the other municipalities that were used to argue the case, and it really varies between who has an HR manager or resource person and the number of employees that they've got, and including parks and police department. I sort of look at, we've got 75 employees and another 15 that are exempt, and is that the size of an organization that would benefit from an HR person, and also would our community therefore benefit? We're looking at more than 1% tax increase for this whole thing. So that's part of it. I don't yet have a grasp on it. I'm not yet convinced that that's what we need to do. The other part that I also looked at in this report that talked about the location of where to put this new employee. And we need to get some flexibility in the walls in our town hall, because where do we put them? And one of the suggestions was the Oak Room. And my sense is we're now putting someone off-site from the rest of the department. And yes, the individual would be walking around and interacting and whatnot. But I'm also concerned from a quality, from satisfaction of work environment if they are stuck downstairs. I realize IT is down there, but there are a couple more people. Anyhow, I digress here. I'm not convinced that this is something we need to do as a municipality yet. And having said that, I'm also concerned how this is, from a really practical perspective, how this is going to play out for the individual of where their office is, their desk is. Thank you.
Yep. Go ahead, Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Chair. Question through you to staff, if I might, Mr. Hissick. Page 7 of the binder under operating expenditures under personnel. I'm just wondering, does that include every single person in the organization, including firefighters and RCMP? As well as all of staff and I'm assuming council, perhaps?
Councillor, that includes all the tax-funded personnel. So there are additional personnel that are funded through the utilities.
Thank you.
And also some in the capital program.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the number, and as some might remember, last year I voted against the position for a communications manager. I just didn't feel like it was time coming out of a pandemic for us that we had the ability to take on more exempt staff. And this is going to be another one. And I'm looking at the 2023 personnel, and it's close to $9 million. And that's a staggering figure to me, given the size of our town and given the size of the population that we serve. I guess my concern is that this number continues to grow, and our exempt staff continues to grow. And as a staff during this term, to hire this many exempt staff year after year, and maybe there won't be any forthcoming in the next term, I don't know. But it just seems like it's a lot to put on the taxpayer at this point in time. And I'm not comfortable with it. I wasn't comfortable with it last year, and I'm not comfortable with it this year. Between the two positions, next year's budget's going to add more than 2% to the budget, which is substantial. And I view both these positions as really like to have, but not must have positions. That's kind of the way I viewed them, my perspective. Others will have a different perspective, of course. I just worry about, given the size of our staff, if we're just not getting too big in terms of the overall expenditure and how this is going to impact budgets going forward. So I'm going to think on it for the rest and hear what others have to say. But at this point in time, I'm not in favor as I wasn't last year, just because I think the timing is all wrong. And maybe in the future, this is something that I think we may have a greater need for, and be in a better financial position to do. But at this point, I just don't see it. Thank you, Chair.
Go ahead, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I strongly support the addition of an HR professional to the town's complement. I can only describe the field as very dynamic and evolving, and I think the CAO has done a good job of describing the complexities of dealing, with two unions and some of the challenges that it presents or could potentially present for the town. This is an investment in our efficiency, and I think it may be somewhat intangible, the cost savings that we'll experience from the addition of this position. But my expectation is this is a professional who helps keep us on side and keep us out of trouble in terms of how we deal with employees and employee relations. And I think as the town grows, it's to be expected that not only our infrastructure will grow, but also our capability to provide the support that our staff needs to run the town. So I'm comfortable with this. I was somewhat entertaining to further discuss the suggestion around a September rollout versus January of the new year. It may be a bit of a red herring discussion in my mind now, unless we're really looking for that $45,000 in this budget. to me, I think the position is important enough, and I think I've just articulated the reasons why I support it, that I'd be comfortable approving it as is suggested in the report for this budget cycle. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll be brief. I support the addition of the position, and I guess I'd be okay with having it start in January, but I would prefer to actually have it start in September. I think the benefits are received the earlier you have the position in place, and with the round of union negotiations coming up, the timing would be right to have the position filled for the negotiations rather than immediately after they're completed. Thanks.
Okay, seeing no further speakers, I will look to see if anybody wants to make the motion. Go ahead, Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I would move that we refer the report and the staff recommendation to our deliberations on February 22nd.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor O'Keefe, was that you putting up your hand? No. Any other discussion? Mayor McNeil-Smith, that is different from the motion that's on there. Do you wish to explain?
Yes, for some of these significant reports this evening, I appreciate the discussion that we've had as council. I would like to consider, the comments made from colleagues. This is not a decision that is being made in isolation with regards to the overall budget, and would like to consider it. And if we happen to receive any citizen feedback over the next 2 weeks on our budget prior to going into those scheduled deliberations on the 22nd.
Thank you.
And I must say, I at this point I am supportive, but in the context of this being part of the larger budget, I would like to make that motion.
Any further discussion? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor of referring to the budget deliberations? That's unanimous. We will go on to the next item on our budget, which is the Resthaven Park Off-Leash Dog Park. And does somebody on staff wish to introduce? Ms. Clary, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So thank you. As you heard from the residents earlier this evening, there was quite a bit of feedback from the Resthaven Dog Park engagement that was held in 2021. To give you some background, the town did undertake the Parks Master Planning process in 2018, and then also did a Parks Concept Plan for Resthaven Park shortly after that. One of the key priorities from the Parks Master Plan was an off-leash dog park on the east side of Sydney. In that plan, it recommended a few different parks. However, it recommended effective control areas for dogs, off-leash dogs. So the areas wouldn't be actually fully fenced in, so dogs could have the potential to get out of those areas still. As we looked into it a little bit further, we found that wasn't really a suitable option for Sydney's demographic, just because if someone with a mobility issue lets their dog off leash, they wouldn't be able to go after the dog if the dog ran into another part of the park. And also, the general public's not really familiar with these effective control dog areas. So if you're walking into a fully fenced dog park, you're aware that an off-leash dog might come and jump up on you. Whereas if you're just walking through a park and you don't realize you cross into this effective control area, it's not ideal, because that's where people could be frightened of dogs if they're not comfortable with dogs or not expecting a dog to jump up on them. So as we started looking into it, many of the locations that were recommended in the Parks Master Plan weren't actually ideal for an off-leash dog park. Staff had a really hard look, and we found that Resthaven Park may be an area that with a large enough space, and also one that didn't back onto residential backyards. That's another thing we hear about Rathdown Park, how people let their dogs off leash there, and then it kind of there's lots of dogs living in the backyards of those houses that back onto Rathdown Park. So it creates quite a noise disturbance for the neighborhood. We've received complaints both from residents living there and also park users about how noisy it can get when an off-leash dog is in the area. So really those parks that back onto, and Sydney has a lot of those parks, unfortunately, that back onto residential backyards. So our options are fairly limited when it comes to a suitable location for an off-leash dog park. So we looked into Resthaven Park. In the park's concept plan for Resthaven Park, the space that was in option B, which is the preferred option from the survey. That was just open green space in the plan. So we are proposing that be turned into an off-leash dog park, a fully fenced park. We did receive a pretty good turnout, over almost like 600 results online, which is pretty good. 67% of those were in favor of an off-leash dog park in Resthaven Park. The main concerns that people had who were not in favor of a park or dog park there were the negative impacts to other park users. And we're trying to mitigate that by selecting the smaller dog park option. We had two options that were available for engagement. One of them took up most of the green space. The other one was smaller, and it took up just kind of half, maybe it was slightly more than half the park. So that would provide still space for other park users. There are concerns about impacts to birds. We have spoken with environmental groups about that. Dogs do have an impact on migratory birds. If a dog is in the area, a bird's has heightened senses. It causes them stress. So there is an impact. However, off-leash dogs going into the migratory bird sanctuary are much worse than a dog being, 50 meters or 100 meters away. So that was taken into consideration. We have heard that dogs do get off leash, and there have been reports of bird attacks from off leash dogs in the migratory bird sanctuary. So this, will have it's better than the status quo at this point in time for that park. And another concern was insufficient parking, and staff do think that is something we should look at when we're doing the downtown parking study. We should add this little area to that study and determine if we should have time limited parking here to make the parking more for park users and not so much for people who want to park there for 8 hours a day every day, rather have it higher turnover by making it 2-hour, 3-hour parking. So that is the summary of why we think there should be a dog park in this location, and we are proposing a $40,000 budget item to install the fencing, and depending on if there's still budget remaining, we will look at doing a wood chip pathway around the inside perimeter of the park as well. And that's everything.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. I'll look to my colleagues to see if there are any questions. Councillor Garnett, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Clary, for your report. I visited the site and actually spoke with Miss Batty at the start of the night when she made her comments, and had a discussion with her dog. And as I was there, actually, after they left, a couple came in with 2 dogs and let them off leash right away. So they were running around off leash in the park. So I got a good example of what happens there. It was good to see. It is a beautiful park. The questions I have for you pertain to, and this is maybe not just generally to you, but to staff in general. I believe at one time that area was a 30-kilometer-an-hour speed zone, and changed in the last few years to 50. And I'm kind of curious as to why, given that there's a playground there. And I'm wondering that also, if it's possible, if we do approve this park, given the potential for gates being left open, dogs getting out, children chasing them, if the speed limit can be reduced in that area, given the safety concerns that might arise.
Through the chair to Councillor Garnett. that is something we could consider, reducing the speed in that area. From what I understand, it has always been 50 kilometers an hour there. There is a fence between the park and the road, so the reduced speed limit isn't required because there is that fence barrier. But council does have the power to modify the streets and traffic bylaw and add that to the 30 kilometers an hour area if that's what they wanted to do.
And the other question I have is regarding the actual space itself on option B. Is it possible that that can be modified slightly? And what I'm looking at when I was at the site looking at the diagram, it appears from what you've drawn there that the path, the cemented path, is actually inside of the fence, and it makes to me it makes more sense that that fence would be on the other side, leaving the path for pedestrians to go from Resthaven to towards the water. And also, I'm wondering if, to alleviate some of the concerns about the birds, if we couldn't possibly shorten it and sort of where the Y is and the little island there went straight across behind the two trees, just to create a bigger buffer from potential activity from dogs towards the shoreline and the bird sanctuary.
Through to Councillor Garnett. Yes, we did receive some feedback about the pathway. I think the entranceway, the actual entrance on the concrete path or the asphalt path will need to be slightly modified compared to what's in the imagery. However, the path was intentionally actually left in as part of the dog park for people with mobility challenges because that is such a high dog owner demographic that we're aware of in Sydney. So we thought it would be easier for people with mobility challenges to actually go there and let their dogs off leash while staying on the path rather than having to walk on the less stable grassy area.
Right.
So that part of the path was intentionally left in there. However, I think there definitely is some room for improvement as far as like maybe adding an additional path over towards the playground or something like that could be done in the future.
Okay.
But there was a reason why we left the path in there.
Okay.
Within the dog park. As far as shortening it, it's always a possibility if we get direction to do so.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. No questions for Ms. Clary, just some overall comments. I like what staff have proposed here. I do want to address some concerns that have been brought up by folks. One thing about, parks should be for people. This is absolutely, I see, for people with dogs. One of the things
So, Councillor, we don't have a motion on the table yet to discuss.
Okay.
If you don't have a comment that's direct comments about the park directed to staff, we'll just wait until we actually have a motion on the table.
Okay, I thought we were proceeding like we did with the other reports to provide comment, but.
Well, this one has as a recommendation with it. There's a motion that comes with this report, so.
Okay, that's fine. I'll just hold off for now then, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. Through to staff, refresh my memory, please, in terms of the survey itself. I know you noted that the response was quite high. Was there an opportunity in that survey for survey participants to provide comments and or alternate suggestions? And if so, I don't know how voluminous that would be the feedback that you received. Wondering if there's an appetite to, if this comes back for further budget deliberation, to be able to share that in some format with council, just to let us have a little more insight in the type of feedback we had.
Yes, through to Councillor Rintoul. There is our wonderful communications manager did a survey analysis, so that's all summarized already, and you have that information if that's something you'd like to look at.
Okay, thank you. That's all for my questions, Madam Chair.
Councillor or Mayor McNeil Smith, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. My questions through to staff are on, two types. One is going back to comments from the two speakers this evening. Also live in that general neighborhood and frequent that park quite often, and I've heard from residents on both sides of this firsthand. And that is that what was suggested, that this is a change for council. Why are we going from the all ages activities orientation discussed at the open house during the initial engagement to suddenly this park? And but staff, I remember going to those engagement sessions in I think it was the fall of 2018. Can staff perhaps speak to the interest that was shown on behalf of respondents during that engagement to having a dog park?
Sure, through to Mayor McNeil Smith. The dog park wasn't on the table for Resthaven Park during that engagement. It was recommended in Ratdown Park, Beaver Park, and one other park. The other park escapes me right now. So those, it was, and they weren't proposing any fully fenced dog parks at that time. They were proposing effective control dog parks, which, as we looked into it further, as I mentioned before, they're not really suitable for Sydney's demographic. So it wasn't part of that engagement that was done, which is why we went back out to receive more community engagement, because this was a new idea for Resthaven Park.
Thank you. And my second question is with regards to the design, and I don't want to micromanage the design, but having frequented the park a number of times over the last week, we can see from the diagram the way the existing pathway goes around three sides of this park, and you provided the explanation to Councillor Garnett's question why part of the existing paved is within the fence. But interestingly, whether walking by myself or with my wife in the park, and when approaching people coming the other direction on any section of those walkways, it seems to still be a kind of a standard. 90% of the time, people actually step off the paved part. One party steps onto the grass on one side, and one party steps onto the grass on the other side. So you're not actually using the path as you pass by. But it's I don't know how long that will remain. But in seeing the fence, it appears to be in the design to be almost adjacent to that walkway. Could it be a consideration for the fence line to actually be 3 or 4 feet inside the pathway to continue to facilitate, whether people have a dog or not, how they may wish to pass each other on the paths?
Sorry, so you would like to move the fence so that the path is outside of the fenced dog park?
Well, sorry, let me speak directly to that section that when you addressed Councillor Garnett's question. And it seems, and I appreciate the rationale for leaving some of the pathway inside of the fence in terms of it being accessible to all users. However, that would leave, well, I guess that's almost the entirety of it until near the water's edge. It's just that part of the pathway is used, for people cutting through the park on a regular basis. And my thought was that if a new path could be put in, I realize that would now be additional expense to this design. I don't anticipate that the length of path would have to be substantial inside the dog park to make it accessible for all users. So I'll leave that one question and then clarify the second part of my question about the rest of the perimeter. Sorry, and you also mentioned in the introduction, right at the end of your staff introduction, about possible chip path inside the fence, and what would be the intended purpose of that?
That would be a better walking surface for users of the dog park. yeah, if staff could relook at the design and come back with an alternate budget item, if that's something that you would like us to do, as far as changing where the fence goes and maybe providing a more solid path for a short duration, like inside the fence. And so keeping the existing path outside of the fence, and then having just a smaller area of paved area inside the fence. We could look at that and bring that back and let you know what the additional costs of that would be.
No, thanks for that, and I appreciate the intended purpose of the chip trail, and I say that would be of value. For example, the Parkland track area is actually a very popular off-leash dog park area, and while there is a lot of grass area, field area there for dogs to run freely, people tend to walk on the track because of the dampness that might be in the on the grass, sort of thing. So I can appreciate that intended use. Would not the chip trail through a portion of the inside perimeter be an additional cost to what's proposed?
It depends how much fencing costs next year. The costs are seeing, they're escalating very rapidly. So, yeah, we may not have any budget left to do any of that chip trail if fencing goes up, which it likely will.
Okay.
But if there is remaining budget, we would consider doing the trip trail through a portion of it.
Okay, I do have, so I do want to clarify the other perimeter. So the fence along the south portion of the dog park area. Again, I can't tell from the diagram what the intention is of how close the fence will be to the walkway, either there or on the water side. But the suggestion is that given the way people are using the paths today, with or without dogs, and because of the pandemic, grass area between the path and the fence on the outside, I believe would be of benefit, or I would ask staff to give consideration to that. I'll leave my comment there and then make a comment that I think it's a very large area. When I think of the other dog park areas, again, Parkland, the Parkland Fields are a very popular off-leash dog park area, and of course, Southampton Park in North Sanishtown Lochside is a very popular area as well. And those areas are much larger, but I do see, you do see all demographics, all ages using this park, the playground and the open space area. And my gut sense is that the option B could be smaller and still be very practical for users. So I'll leave it if staff have a comment as to any further comment, and then I would like to make a motion unless other colleagues would like to speak.
Sorry, now that I understand what you're saying, sorry about the fencing, there will be enough space for a mower to cut the grass. That'll be the spacing, how we determine how much space there's between the existing path and the fence. So that would be enough space for someone to walk on.
Chair, I'll turn briefly if there are any other speakers. If not, I'll like to make a motion.
Yeah, go ahead and make the motion. After telling Councillor O'Keefe she couldn't just make comments. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll make the motion to refer this back to staff for consideration of a partial redesign with regards to interior path, whether it be for mobility users or for general dog walk users, and also consideration of the realignment on the north boundary of the park. I don't know if staff are able to bring that back for budget deliberations on the 22nd, given that request. So that's my motion.
Second for discussion.
Okay, I will open up the floor to discussion. Who are you pointing at? I see Councillor O'Keefe's hand.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just seeking some clarification. from the mayor in terms of, I'm still not completely understanding in terms of what would be different with the current design. So are we proposing to make the walkway wider and a chip trail completely on the inside of the perimeter? So I'm just looking for a little bit more clarity on that.
Thank you. So my first reason for referring it back is with regards to the interior walkway. And the current design has leaving almost that entire mid-park walkway within, which is currently paved or concrete, inside the dog fence area. And as the staff have indicated, the intention for that was to provide access to all types of mobility. And I appreciate that. My comment was I think that is a heavily used path within the park and would like to leave it open to all users. And that staff gave consideration to a smaller new paved stretch within the and I would suggest that all mobility users, if they were going to access, if you look at the roadway and you access the gate there, I think it would be easier for people with mobility devices to actually access at the south end. So if the just because of the level or change of grade. But at any rate, that's my reason for changing the interior section. And I also appreciated staff's comment with regards to the benefits of having chip within the interior of at least some or all of the perimeter.
That's great. Okay, thank you. Understanding that better, I fully support that for those reasons. I think it's a good idea to continue to have paved access all through that section there, so everybody can use that, whether they're going to the dog park or not. It is a very common place for people to go for walks. And I favor the paved one on the inside also for the reasons you mentioned. Also because having had a dog and having been to dog parks before, I'm not sure how long a chip trail will survive in a dog park. I think there'd be a tendency for them to want to dig those up, and I don't think the chip trail would last very long, or we'd be in there having to dump more chips on there over and over again. So I think the idea of some sort of paved one on the interior is a good idea. In regards to other concerns that have been brought up about parks being for people, as I started to say before, this is definitely for people. And one of the things that I don't know if members of council will recall, but I think it was when we were looking at community resiliency during COVID and looking at different things. And one of the things that's been identified is dog parks help people build connections with each other to their community and help build community resiliency. So for that reason, I think a dog park is a good thing to have. In terms of that location, there aren't a lot of other places for people to let their dogs run free. And yes, they can go to Rathdown Park. There's a lot of people that let them run on the beach in Roberts Bay, which isn't good for the birds. So in terms of mitigating the impact on birds, I think having something like this where people could go let their dogs run free, then that might mitigate or stop them from letting them run free in other areas. In terms of, actually, I think I'll just leave it at that. That's good. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Wainwright, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So my understanding from the budget package is that this is not a tax-funded project. It's identified that the funding is from other. So, and if I'm correct on that, while I can appreciate and support having staff, have a careful look at the option before council approves it, it would seem to me if it's not going to have any effect on the tax rate, we could leave it in the budget. If council decides we're not going to pursue it, it simply wouldn't get spent. If council does, approve a design and wants to go ahead with it, it's there. But there isn't any urgency to have that redesign completed for the 22nd if it's not going to influence the budget outcome. That was simply my thinking. I think staff are probably going to have plenty of other things to deal with before our next budget meeting. And that this having the design sorted out isn't going to, I don't think, make a difference to the budget meeting. The other thing I'd comment is I think we're going to have a wave of input from the public. We've had an email come in late this afternoon that didn't make it into the agenda. It's because people are just hearing about the dog park proposal, and we're going to see some reaction to that. So I think we should, we're not in a hurry. And even if this is in the budget, it doesn't mean that the thing is going to get built. Council will take the time to look at the design carefully and all the comments that come in. But I'm just suggesting that there isn't any urgency to get staff to have a design sorted out in the next 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Question through you to staff. Mr. Hick, if you can confirm what Councillor Wainwright had said, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Councillor Wainwright is correct. It's not a tax-funded item. The important thing at this time is to decide whether it remains in the budget or not. And if it remains in, then it can proceed. It can certainly be redesigned and brought back to council prior to initiation, but if it's not approved as part of the budget, then it won't likely happen this year.
Thank you. If I may, I just want to say that I appreciate the speakers who spoke on earlier today. It's great to get input from the community. I must admit I was a little alarmed when I saw it was only a 2-week window for the survey, and then I flipped over the page and saw how many people responded, and I felt a little better because that's actually a fairly good turnout. And I have to say that the percentage of people that were in support of having an off-leash dog park there reflects my experience in the 5 years of delivering in that area and conversations with dog owners. That was something that I heard repeatedly, actually, that people were really needing or wanting an area, especially the seniors, actually, surprisingly enough. It just seemed like something that they had been asking previous councils for, and it just was finding a place to put it more than anything. And I guess another concern with Rathdown, other than the noise next to the neighbors, is we have a playground there that we've just built that is not fenced in. So if you get a big dog that gets away from somebody, then you got a small child and there's a potential issue there. So another reason why that park generally doesn't work. So I'm generally in favor with the idea, and I would definitely will support the motion that's put forward that we keep it in. I think it's just something that I think that the community has been looking for quite some time. And I think with a few modifications, it can be made to work in that area. And hopefully that some of the concerns that have been raised by residents can be addressed through that. Thank you, Chair.
So I suppose I see Mayor McNeil Smith again, but go ahead. I want to see what you say before I speak.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify my motion, and I concur with Councillor Wainwright's remarks with regards to this process and the budget. And so when I made the motion, I spoke to possible timeline of it coming back, but I was looking for a staff comment with regards to the feasibility of that. But I don't consider that part of the motion. It's just a referral to staff to consider redesign, and staff would bring it back at a time they thought appropriate. My motion does not affect whether it's in the budget or not, and so it would leave it in the budget for the time being. And depending on the outcome of this motion, I would follow with a subsequent motion to refer the report and the recommendations to budget deliberations, knowing that we would not have a redesign back before us on the 22nd.
Thank you for that clarification. I thought you might be saying something about that motion, which was going to change how I spoke to it. So having not spoken to this, I'll take my chance to do so now. That so long as we're not expecting staff to come back and with their alterations before we go and have to approve this and discuss it at the budget, I'm happy with this going forward to budget deliberations with option B and the knowledge that we will probably be hearing more from the public on it, and we'll have the chance to discuss that afterwards. Oh, Councillor Rintoul, I see you for a second time.
Is it? I think it's my first. I asked a question of staff earlier. I'm a bit confused now, and I'd like to hear the motion again. And I'm also fine if the redesign comes back at a later date. But my understanding was that of the original motion was that this is being referred to further discussion in the budget process, in keeping with Councillor Duncan's comments, Chair Duncan's comments around getting some additional feedback, likely prior to that ultimate decision. So can I hear the motion again, please?
So basically the motion was that the Resthaven Park off-leash dog park with a smaller footprint design of option B be referred back to staff for a redesign, respecting the interior pathway and the realignment of the north boundary of the park. Those two items for staff to look at.
So the motion is silent on the
Yes.
the budget element. So I support that motion, and I take it that's going to be a motion arising and to be further addressed then on the budget element. Thank you.
Having reheard the motion, is there any further discussion on that motion? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. Would anyone like to make a motion about this item and the budget? Go ahead, Mayor McNeil-Smith.
I move that we refer the report and the staff recommendation to February 22nd budget deliberations.
Second.
Discussion? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, motion carried, unanimous. We will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is fire department staffing, and we have a staff report, and we'll look to Chief Mickelson to introduce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This report provides council with a projected timeline to bolster our fire department staffing as part of the 2022 to 2026 financial plan. Most importantly, in 2022, it recommends funding for in-hall staffing 24/7, 7 days a week, utilizing our volunteer firefighters on a modest stipend basis. Our after-hours response time has long been our Achilles heel, and our community, with its built form, its unique demographics, and its considerable growth, having a convergent volunteer response, particularly after hours, definitely makes us an outlier with comparable communities, and it's extremely difficult for me to be able to protect this growing community. We're kind of going backwards. We're not even treading water at this point. So that's really the concern and the rationale for adding the staffing. It's probably best if I explain it like this, and this is our challenge, is that whether you live on the west side of the highway or you live on Bradford Avenue, it's 2 a.m. and the pager goes off. Well, you have to get up, you have to get dressed. Hopefully you're organized enough and your car's facing the right way, and then you have to drive to the fire hall and you have to obey all posted traffic and speed signage. You're not allowed to exceed the posted speed limits. You have to arrive at the fire hall, get turned out, get organized, know where you're going, and then get in the fire truck and then potentially go back to exactly where you came from. That takes time, and our ability to turn that around, whether it's on a weekend where we're not staffed or particularly at night, more often than not, we're exceeding well over 10 minutes. And the issue is that if we're there in 5 minutes or less, we have a really good chance to save a life. If we're there around 10 minutes, we're probably going to be realistically protecting the building that's adjacent to the one that's involved in fire, particularly if you look in the context of Sydney, where you know, a 2,000 square foot house on a what many would consider a small subdivision is now being subdivided, and 2 small lot homes are going in where the eaves are, you know, there's 6 foot separation. Those are issues. And then after 10 minutes, we're, you know, it's an exercise really in window dressing. We're not really doing much. So that's our challenge. And in, you know, the last 3 or 4 years that we tabulated, we've probably added close to 700 apartment units in the town of Sydney, and that doesn't include small lot subdivisions, commercial or industrial additions, and that obviously doesn't include any of the additional building that's underway or being contemplated. So utilizing our existing volunteer cohort on a very modest basis allows us to staff the building with 2 people 24/7. Those people would be supplanted by the duty officer. So really we'd have 3 people there, all within approximately 5 minutes. And then we can get a good start, establish a water supply, get some water flowing, and basically kind of what we coin as turn back the clock, or kind of reset the fire to allow us additional time for additional resources to come. So that's really the long and the short of what we're trying to accomplish, is just to kind of basically catch up to a community that's really outgrown and outpaced our response capacity. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'll look to my colleagues for any questions. Councillor Fallon, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So if I may, through you to Chief Mickelson. So just trying to understand the scenario you've just described, where a firefighter gets called from their home base and has to travel to the fire hall and then go through all of the steps and bring the vehicle and equipment to the scene. If I'm understanding correctly, by having the hall staffed, the number of staff that are in the hall would be adequate for responding to the call and successfully interfering with the emergency progress, as in mitigating the fire.
Through the chair, Councillor Fallon, you know, having the 2 people in the hall and ability, you know, our target time is what we call the reflex time, from the time of page until, you know, wheels are turning. We shoot for an ideal time between about 90 seconds, but it's probably closer to 2 minutes in the middle of the night. And yes, you know, the 2-person model supported by the duty officer is not sufficient to conduct an interior fire attack. But what it does do, it allows us to initiate flowing water from the outside of the structure and starting a lot of those initial actions that would allow us to do things. So yes, it makes a tremendous difference, particularly in an involved fire. If we can get water on the fire through the exterior into the interior, it makes the interior of the building much more tenable, and the likelihood of us obviously saving lives and saving property go up dramatically in that circumstance.
Okay, thank you. And if I may, Chair, from that perspective, can you also tell us, Chief, the number of calls that you're responding to? Are we looking at more medical calls, or so what's the split, I guess, between medical calls and the calls that are traditional firefighting calls?
Again, through the chair to Councillor Fallon, the split is approximately, we probably do about 35 to 40% of what you'd call the traditional fire suppression calls in respect to fires, vehicle fires, vessel fires, alarm bells, smoke in a structure, motor vehicle accidents, those type of what we would, you know, the kind of the very traditional calls. The remaining 55 to 60% would be spread fairly equally or probably not as much equally, probably a greater percentage would be what we call MESA calls, or medical emergency service assists, which would be medical aid calls. And then our department is, we're very proactive, and we try to consider ourselves a risk reduction department. So we conduct a lot of public assist calls, where we attend persons' residences and assist with smoke alarms, and performing kind of in-home fire safety inspections and those type of things. So we count those as response incidents as well, and we probably do about 250 to 300 of those annually as well. Hopefully that clears it up a bit.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chair.
So I have Councillor O'Keefe, followed by Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Chair. So first off, I completely understand and get the rationale for 24/7. Just to confirm my understanding, basically, you want to get 2 people out the door right away with a firefighting apparatus, so they can get there within that 10 minutes, and then the rest of the volunteers kind of catch up, is kind of how I'm understanding it.
Yeah, again, through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe, I mean, in the perfect world, we'd have more people in the building, but I mean, we have to, it has to be scalable and realistic. So definitely having the 2 people in the building supplanted and by the duty officer. I'm the duty officer right now. I have gear in the back of my car, so I know it's circumstance. Actually, in the time that you were debating the off-leash dog park, we attended what was a commercial structure fire on Amelia Avenue, which was actually just some people cooking their dinner outside. But nevertheless, yes, that's how it works, and that's the intent.
Yeah, and so that makes sense to me. And I think it's important for the public to also know that this, aside from the safety aspect of, as you said, saving lives and reducing the impact on property damage. The other aspect that the Chamber of Commerce had brought up was that 10-minute response time, which is now something in the BC Building Code. And so if I could just sort of explain what I think my understanding of that is, and if you want to jump in, the way I understand it is that the BC Building Code now says that unless you can get the fire department to respond to fires within 10 minutes, 90% of the time, then that puts additional things in place. So for example, I recall one of the architects in Sydney complaining that they were doing a small townhouse development, I think maybe with 6 or 8 units, that normally wouldn't require a sprinkler system. But because we couldn't guarantee response time in 10 minutes, that they had to install that sprinkler system. I think it also impacted some where the windows can be, and some of those areas where you said there's very close proximity of buildings. And so the point that had been made to me by the chamber is that this also costs money in terms of adding costs to new buildings. And if we're trying to do something about affordable housing, having to have these extra measures in place actually sort of, is counter to that objective. So just, have I kind of captured that accurately?
Through the chair to the Councillor O'Keefe, you did an excellent job. The 10-minute BC Building Code requirement actually came into force. It was first published in 2013 and actually came into force in 2014. We tried a number, and this goes back to when we were at the old hall at 9837 3rd Street. We were close at that time to meeting the response criteria and the timeframes, largely because at that time we had a number of volunteers that were living one across the street in the old McClary's building. A couple of guys lived in the Argyle, and a couple in the Marina Court building right behind. So our ability to meet the response times, we were quite close, and that was obviously a unique and kind of transient time frame. And then I wanted to put into place a bunch of measures to see that if we could expedite that before we declared that we couldn't meet that threshold, and that we put a shot clock in the hall that identified the 6-minute mark when you had to respond, and an aggressive driving or apparatus training program, because sometimes the lag or our inability to meet the requirements was a qualified driver actually drive the apparatus. So when we exhausted those were kind of the shots we had in our gun. We kind of said we worked with development services and said, we cannot meet this requirement. And yes, you're correct. The BC Building Code states that if you cannot reach a fire 90 for a fire or an alarm bells or a structural fire call in less than 10 minutes, 90% of the time with a fire department apparatus, and that's something that it's not someone in a pickup truck, it's actually a fire department apparatus that pumps and carries water. If you can't do that, then the separating distances and limiting distances and exposures of the adjacent structures, the limiting distances increase, and it reduces the amount of windows and surface openings, because what they're concerned is, the BC Building Code's primary concern is exposure to an adjacent structure. So yes, it does negatively affect the construction of small lot subdivisions, carriage homes, and all those type of things would be negatively affected by our inability to meet these requirements.
Right. Well, thanks for that. So my next question, if I may, so I'm a fan of 24/7 staffing that recognize the need. What I'm struggling a bit more with is the cost for it. And so in the report, when I read the report initially, it talked about incremental funding of $77,500. So initially I thought, oh, okay, well, that's not too much. But I since understand we're using that vacant position, which was 131,000, and then plus the 77,000. So so the actual cost to do that, we're saying now is about 208,500. Have I got that right?
Through the chair to Councillor Keith, yeah, approximately, and of course I'd defer to Mr. Hick for the specifics, but really the math is not too terribly difficult. You have 365 days and 2 people at night at $165 for 12 hours, which is minimum wage. For context, these are all NFPA 1001 certified firefighters that if they were an IIFF member and they had 1 year seniority, their rate would be about $49 an hour. So I think we need to look at it through the lens that it seems expensive, but in reality, it's a lot of capability for very little investment. And then we're also staffing the hall on Sunday. We have and backfilling 1 position on Saturday. So there's 2 12-hour positions every Sunday. And those are actually paid at a day rate of $34.50 an hour. So basically you do that math and you get very close to that $200,000 figure, plus or minus. And I would happily have Andrew, do the last little bit of math, but that's how you arrive at the approximate 200K figure.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess the only other thing in regards to the costs, and maybe, not for tonight, but maybe for the 22nd, a bit more clarity. The thing that sort of threw me off is that report that we had in June 2020, when at that time we talked about the cost that it would be for overnight staffing, and at that time it was 125,000, and so it's gone up a bit, and so it would be helpful for me to kind of understand where the delta or the change is. How do we get from 125? Because like you said, I actually did the math based on what I thought, and it came to around 128, and so that's why I thought, okay, we can do that with that within that 131K of that vacant position. So I was struggling a bit as to where the extra 77,000 came in. So so maybe some further clarification on that for next time would be great.
Yeah, sorry, and again, through the chair to Councillor Keith, yeah, we'd be happy to provide that. And in basically it's broken down. You know, it's a bit of an apples and oranges. It's a bit of a change. You know, that was for night staffing back in 2020. It didn't contemplate Sunday staffing, so it was night staffing. It wasn't 24/7 staffing, which sounds a bit nuanced, but when you add it up, it's a bit. And this program also will result in a change of hours for our career staff. So some will start at 6 a.m. and some will start at 10. So we actually have a couple of, again, a couple of folks starting at 6 and then ending at 6 to allow for that true 24/7 staffing. And then because we're utilizing the existing money from a firefighter position that's not being filled, we also allocated approximately, I think, about $25,000 in backfill, just to make sure, because we're going to be running pretty thin, just with 2 people on a couple hours on either end of the beginning of the shift and the end of the shift. We want to make sure that we can backfill and have that minimum staffing. So there was some money allotted to ensure that we can backfill and actually fill those positions and not run short. So again, we can detail that for you, but that's really how the numbers play out. There's nothing really left on the bone. There's no fat there. I'll tell you that.
Great. Okay, that's great for now. Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Councillor Wainwright up next.
The points that I was going to make have been covered by Councillor O'Keefe's remarks. Just, obviously the public safety aspects are the priority, but the building code requirements of not being able to make this response time have been something that council has commented about on a lot of designs, and APC has constantly been dealing with it. The limit on the number and size of windows on some of these small lot developments, materials, forcing them to go install sprinklers. It's just a lot of additional challenges to come up with a design of a building that looks good in the neighborhood. So it's not just the public safety. This is also about the quality of design of new construction. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Councillor Garnett, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question through you to Chief Mickelson. So if I'm understanding you correctly, prior to 24/7 coverage, would there be times in the evening and weekends when the community safety building would be completely unmanned?
Through the chair to the councillor, absolutely. Well, obviously, pre-COVID, every night and every Sunday, it was completely volunteer convergent response.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see. Does anyone have, would anyone like to put forward the recommendation? Go ahead, Mayor McNeil-Smith.
I'll move that the staff report and the staff recommendation be forwarded to February 22nd deliberations.
Second.
Any further discussion? Okay, call the question. All in favor? And that goes ahead. We'll go on to the next item on our agenda, which is the purchase of the used fire vehicle. And we have a report. I don't, Chief Mickelson would like to, Councillor Hick, Mr. Hick, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Even though my battery is fully charged, my computer unfortunately is failing. Is it possible to have maybe a 5-minute recess at this time? And if possible, that second report from the fire department is meant to be somewhat outside the budget process. So what I would propose is perhaps we haven't made as much progress as intended tonight. So perhaps maybe just let me finish the rest of my presentation around capital and then defer all additional deliberations to the 22nd, and then deal with that purchase of the fire vehicle separately and call it a night. If council wishes to go beyond that, I'm more than happy to, but it's just a recommendation.
All right, we will break for 5 minutes to let Mr. Hissick recharge his laptop first before he continues on his presentation.
Sorry, question to Sandy. Are we still recording or?
Yes.
Okay. So as a clarification, I take it we're going to need to extend our meeting beyond 3 hours?
At 10 o'clock. Yeah.
We only need to make a motion to extend the meeting if we make it to 10.
Okay. I don't intend to support that motion. We seem to be putting an awful lot off to the next meeting. So I'll just leave that with the chair's for consideration.
All right, I will call the meeting back to order at 9 p.m. and allow Mr. Hick to continue with his presentation regarding the other items of the budget before we go on to item 8B, as I almost did.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the brief recess. I just want to give Council some additional context about the capital budget so that we at least have this in mind should we decide to postpone the rest of deliberations until the 22nd, rather than hitting you up with this new information at that time. I just think we might be a little further ahead if we just cover these items. So the total capital budget, you've been told, is 8.37 million, and only a very tiny amount of that is funded from taxes, being $202,400. Most of it is reserve funded. So the next two slides are an illustration of the tax-funded capital, and it's broken into three areas. One is the annual recurring projects, which we tend to have in our budget each and every year. We have a set amount of funding allocated for these annually, and if there are any savings from the previous year, I carry that forward to reduce the amount of tax funding. Examples of that are engineering equipment, parks equipment is usually 10,000, but we've got 1,500 left over, so it's been reduced. Street light replacement is usually 30, but 25,000 has been carried forward, so the tax impact is only 5. There's one additional carry forward project at Rotary Park. Down, please. So in terms of new projects funded from property taxes, it's a fairly short list. We've got 9 projects totaling 120,000. So if we are looking to reduce the tax impact by cutting tax-funded capital, the ways to do that would likely involve looking at these projects. So as I mentioned earlier, the alternatives are either to find reserve funding for them if we want them to go ahead, or to cut or defer them entirely. Things like the Bevan Park Reader Board, for instance, one suggestion has been made that it could be funded from the amenity reserve, and that's certainly an option. It's up to council to ultimately decide what does and does not constitute an amenity, and if that question comes up at deliberations, I'd be pleased to address that. A brief look at two of our somewhat discretionary reserves, meaning ones that may be allocated to various capital projects. It's the amenity reserve and the land sale reserve. So amenity reserve, we're starting off with an opening balance of over 1.6 million, and we're proposing to fund $576,000 of projects this year, another 345 next year, and so on. So there is capacity within that reserve, but I always like to urge council to look not just at the present, but at the future in terms of what we might be using these funds for. Certainly the affordable housing portion of the amenity reserve was rolled into this balance, and it is still there for that purpose if council sees an eligible project. The land sale reserve is diminishing, but we still have over 600,000 remaining, and most of that is being consumed this year if those projects are approved. By the end of the 5-year plan, we should be down to a fairly low level, and once it's gone, it's gone. It's not the kind of reserve that gets replenished. amenity contributions we get on a regular basis through development. Down, please. I'm not listing all the gas tax projects, but just to illustrate what the beginning balance is for each of the next 5 years, how much we're expecting to receive from the federal government, and how much is included in the current 5-year plan for capital and operating funding. So again, another reserve that has some capacity to take on additional projects, but same old mantra, we do need to look ahead to future climate change and other projects, and possibly supplementing our infrastructure reserve to get certain projects done in there as well. Down, please. So this table illustrates the beginning and ending balance of each of our capital reserves. It starts with the items at the top in red highlighting, which I think of as pure replacement reserves. So there's very little leeway to redirect the use of those funds for various capital projects that are currently tax funded. These are intended for very specific purposes, and they're being used for those purposes in the budget. The off-street parking and alternative transportation reserves, that's the one that was recently split into 2 streams, and we've got healthy balances in both of those as well. Climate action is a brand new reserve. We kickstarted that with some existing funds from one of our other reserves, and we're proposing to start making annual contributions beginning with $50,000 this year. It's the ones at the bottom in the green highlighting that you can think of as discretionary, where we can potentially use those funds within certain limits for funding additional capital projects. So this table also indicates how much we're planning to contribute to these reserves in 2022, 3.2 million, as well as how much we're planning to use, which is 7.5 million, leaving a projected year-end balance of 7.7. Next, please. This would have been the time to ask questions about various capital projects, and if council wishes to do that, I'm more than happy to oblige. Otherwise, this portion of the meeting could be deferred until the 22nd.
Does anyone have questions they would like to ask at this time? Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I support maybe just having questions on this and then moving to the last report and referring to deliberations. But if I do have some questions that I think will help us a little bit in our future deliberations, and that is if Mr. Hissick could go through you, Chair. Mr. Hissick could go back to the reserve slide, please. Thank you. And just to clarify, you indicated the infrastructure reserve at the top, the first one, is for very specific purposes, and that's understood. The contributions are 1.8 million in 2022. Are those 100% tax funded contributions?
No, it does include the water and sewer amounts as well.
Okay, but other than that, there isn't other grants or anything that go into that reserve?
No, it's internally funded.
Okay. Vehicle replacement, again, that 2022 contribution would be 100% tax funded?
That's right. Basically, all of the 2022 contributions are internally funded. You'll see nothing in there for the parking reserve, for amenities, and for land sale. Those are the items that typically roll in through development, and we never predict what may or may not come in, so anything that does will supplement our balance for the end of the year.
Okay, I'd just like to continue. Thank you. I'd like to continue with the fire vehicles, and I realize we have the next report coming up, and this would be a question for that report as well. So I'll just ask it here. And that is, we understand from that report that the total funding, well, I'll just deal with what we see here. And that is, we have a beginning balance of 613,000, a contribution in 2022 of 170,000, which falls $116,000 short of the $900,000 intended use in 2022. Can you speak to that, please?
With this reserve, we tend to look in the longer term rather than just, we can't ensure that we constantly have an appropriate balance, because when the most expensive truck comes up for renewal every 20 to 22 years, being the what's currently known as the Quint, the ladder truck. In the past, we've had to do some temporary borrowing to ensure that we could bridge the gap between where we are in the reserve balance today and where we would need to be. And then over the intervening years, that balance is made up through reserve contributions. So I'm thinking if it's a smaller deficit, that borrowing can be internal. But if it's a big deficit, it would likely require some short-term borrowing like we had the last time we replaced the Quint back in the early 2000s.
Okay, so I appreciate the answer then. It's either internal borrowing. For the 116,000, it's either internal borrowing or other short-term loan. Computer replacement, that's that 90,000 is the tax-funded contributions. The ferry terminal is from the Washington State Ferries lease. Can you speak to where the contributions come from with regards to the agreements reserve? And could you clarify the agreements reserve, please? What it is?
Essentially, there are two components remaining, and those are for the Shoal Center and for the Pier Strata, because the town at the time chose to remain outside of the strata for each of those buildings to a large extent. We don't contribute to the replacement reserves through our strata fees, so the agreement then is that we do our own internal setting aside of reserves equivalent to what we would pay were we part of the strata. So it's just those two facilities, and that funding is internal.
Okay, that's on the smaller side. So off-street parking, I appreciate that we recently split these two reserves, and we understand that this comes through development. The contributions come through development. I'm not going to a specific capital project at this time, but would it be appropriate in a general sense that, for example, bike racks could be funded with off-street parking revenue? Or sorry, alternative transportation funding?
Absolutely, they could be.
Okay. Climate action, we've had that explained, and then you've explained all of the ones in green, and just the one. The general capital is that $125,000 is a tax-funded contribution.
It is. I mean, this is a reserve that we tried to start up a number of times, and because it's relatively new and it's not earmarked for anything specific, it's always the easiest cut when we're looking to reduce. So while it's been around for about 6-8 years, we haven't made an annual contribution every year. Again, it's one of the easier cuts if we choose to reduce. But that and the ferry reserve, which we intended to start making tax contributions to that reserve a number of years ago, that is also one of the easiest cuts because it's fairly new. Once again, there is no town contribution this year to it, but it recommences in 2023 on an annual basis, unless, of course, we're left with additional budget challenges which compel me to cut it once again or defer it once again.
Sorry, just in your last comments there, that in 2023 there would be some tax-funded contribution to ferry terminal as planned? That is
the current plan, yes.
Okay, thank you. My last question is with regards to the gas tax, now referred to as the Community Works Fund. And going back to, I believe, 2020, the federal and provincial governments struck an agreement. I know it's their federal funds to double the annual contribution. So was that was the case in 2020, and again in 2021? Was that repeated? And what's the status of this contribution relative to pre-COVID and COVID?
You're right, it was doubled 2 years in a row, and that's why our balance is so healthy at over 2 million. We have no indication that they're going to increase the amount of funding again this year. So until we hear otherwise, we have to assume that it's according to plan. And that agreement is up for renewal, I believe, after 2024. So any future projections are based on the assumption that it'll be renewed.
Okay, so as we understand it now, UBCM and has certainly lobbied heavily for continuation of that, but as you indicate, there is no indication of increases beyond or increases what we saw in 2021. So it would be approximately 275,000 then that we would expect in 2023, or what?
No, it's 571.
Sorry, it was double 571 in those years.
Roughly, yes.
Okay, so we're going back to 571. Okay. Thank you for all that information.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Chair. While we've got that slide on reserves up, I also had some questions about regarding the fire vehicles reserve. And so if we buy this fire engine that's proposed next, we're going to use it all up. So I'm wondering, like, how many other vehicles we have, and how soon would we be having to replace the next one? And that contribution of 170,000, is that the regular amount that we put in every year? And wondering what that's based on.
We have 3 smaller vehicles slated for replacement next year, but they're much smaller magnitude, and I believe there might be one more in the remainder of the 5-year plan, but that would be outlined in your in the capital section of your binders.
Okay.
As for the contribution, that's one that a couple of years ago we had indicated we would like to increase slightly on an annual basis, but again, it's an easy cut when there's so many other fire department budget pressures. So you keep it at the same level one more year, but eventually we're going to have to do what we said we would do, which is gradually increase it.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And then just one other question, going back to the capital budget, the Galaran sidewalk for 66,000 or so, and I'm wondering, how does that fit in with the Amazon development, and they're planning to do some infrastructure improvements there, putting in sidewalks? Is this impacted at all by that? Will they be contributing to that cost, or is this completely separate?
My understanding is that this is outside the frontage that the developer is paying for, but perhaps Mr. DeMar or Ms. Clary can clarify.
DeMar, do you want to handle this one?
Yes. Yeah, my understanding as well, we're still working with Amazon on their frontage improvements and how they tie into the Galaran project. There may be some overlap there, but at this point, majority of the work is on the, in terms of the sidewalk work, is on the east side of Galaran.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. That's all.
Are there any other questions this time? So at this point, Yeah, Mr. Hick would like to return to his
Sorry,
presentation.
Madam Chair, just a handful of additional slides to finish off, if that's okay. So I would have concluded with just a very brief discussion about how do we fund it all once it's all approved. So we keep hearing about the use of surplus to balance our budget, and I just want to reinforce that and make it a little more clear for council as to what I mean by this. So we're required to have an ongoing surplus from prior years. We can and do have a deficit for one particular year sometimes, but we have to balance our budget. So the way I do that is to take a chunk of surplus to bring it up to the expenditures level. Currently, it's sitting at $450,000 for this year, which is considerably higher than the traditional level that I'm comfortable with. But if council wanted to go higher, it's only a policy that, a long-standing policy we have that would have to be perhaps changed or curtailed. So here's what I mean by balancing the budget with surplus. What you have here is our total tax-funded budget, general operations, of just over $20 million. So on the revenue side, we've got 6.7 million in what you could call other revenues, that being fees, charges, government grants, that kind of thing. Then we had by far the biggest chunk, which is property taxes, that projected at just under 13 million, but might be hard to see on this chart, but we're not quite up to the level of general operating expenditures yet. And that's where 450,000 of surplus comes in. So rather than increasing taxes by that 450,000 to balance, I am taking a large allocation from prior year surplus to accomplish the same goal. So we balance the budget, but at the end of the year, I fully expect that we're not going to need that 450,000. So it remains in surplus for use again next year and in future years. So essentially we budget for a deficit, not a surplus, and we use prior year surplus to balance the budget. And then once everything is said and done, it's down to property taxes and how much do we need to raise it to meet the required level to fund our operations. So the tax increase partially mitigated by the new taxes from growth in the tax base, and as previously mentioned by myself and members of council, we do tend to be conservative in our future projections, and while the number for 2022 should be fairly close to the 200,000 that I've included, I fully expect that the next 2 years will be higher than my projection of $250,000 per year, and that'll certainly help. But I don't want to count those chickens until they're hatched, if you forgive the backyard analogy. So again, general changes in assessment are factored out, as most of us know. We saw a very large increase in the assessed value of the average residence, so tax rates will be reduced by a corresponding 18% as a starting point for 2022. And to that we will apply our general increase. Because the average residence once again increased by a much higher percentage than the average commercial property, that is going to impact the tax multiple. And we'll get into this more in a subsequent meeting, probably after the budget, but that is not something within our control, but it's perceived as a highly negative outcome. Because there are different rates paid by the different classes of property, And we'll get into more detail on that after the budget once again, when we start reviewing our tax distribution policy. So what is next? Any council direction received tonight is going to be built into the second draft of the budget. There were a few items cut or deferred tonight, which will reduce our starting point for the 22nd. Council will certainly have full opportunity to make additional changes to the budget on the 22nd, with the goal being that we get through it all and we approve the budget as amended on February 22nd. If additional meetings are required, however, we would certainly take the time to schedule those. It would likely have to be the following week or later, though. And then once that budget is approved on the 22nd or later, it's considered final. And that is the budget on which the tax rates will be set. And the financial plan bylaw will be brought forward in April and May, along with the tax rates bylaw, to formalize the budget and the tax rates. And I mentioned earlier, the distribution policy will be reviewed prior to setting the tax rates this year. And that is all I had.
So I'll look to my colleagues if they have any questions to finish off while they have Mr. Hissick standing here. Okay, seeing no questions. I know there was a previous slide where it stated we should, if we wanted to discuss motions about how we deal with surplus. I'm going to say, based on the hour, most people would probably prefer to save discussing individual items to the 22nd and move on to our next item on the agenda. So unless any of my colleagues object, that will be what we do. All right, seeing no objections, we will move on to item 8B, the purchase of the used fire vehicle. Oh, go ahead, Mayor McNeil-Smith.
All right, thank you, and want to thank Mr. Hissick for the presentation and taking all the questions this evening. I would move receipt of Mr. Hissick's presentation and also have his report on the agenda.
Thank you.
Second.
All right, any discussion on that? No. All right, call the question. All in favor? All right, motion carried. Now we will move on to the next agenda item.
Thank you again, Madam Chair, and I'll be very brief introducing this council report. Basically, this provides background on the requirements to replace our existing ladder truck, the cost associated with procuring a new ladder truck suited to our town and our built form, and the recommended rationale for purchasing the lightly used late model truck that we're proposing. So I'd be happy to answer any questions relating to those items.
Go ahead, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chief Mickelson. I certainly support what's suggested here, and really pleased to see the cost savings that this initiative will provide the town. I just wanted to clarify the height of this vehicle. You don't anticipate any changes required at the CSB with respect to accommodating this vehicle. It's all good to go in that sense, correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Rintoul, yes, that's correct. We future-proofed this new building with 14-foot doors, so the maximum height of this vehicle is approximately about 12'7", so there's no issues there.
Thank you, Chief.
I have Councillor Garnett, followed by Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. Chief Mickelson, through you to Chief Mickelson. You mentioned the truck is well suited but not perfectly to serve the town of Sydney. Would we be able to buy a new truck that would be perfectly suited to serve the town of Sydney, or is that not ever an option?
Well, and again, through the chair to Councillor Garnett, yeah, there is that unicorn truck out there. it's $2.45 million in 2022. So it exists, but it is very expensive. So we feel that when I found this truck, again, everything's a compromise. We feel that for the cost savings, this offers tremendous value. It'll be very usable, and it'll serve the town well. So yeah, again, there is that perfect truck there, but it comes at a cost.
If I may, my second question would be, as far as the fire underwriter survey and the town's replacement policy, are those things, would it be safe to say that those commence at 2016, at the age when the truck was built, or is it when we actually take ownership of it? Or you mentioned 2018 in here, so does that start at 2016? Does the clock start ticking on that?
Again, through the chair, it's my understanding it would actually start in 2018.
Okay.
And then because the actual vehicle's warranties were triggered in 2018 when it was actually sold to the initial fire department. So it still has its powertrain warranties and a number of other warranties on it until August of 2023.
Okay, so I was just concerned about the 2016 number. If that was the date they would go by, then that actually would accelerate buying a new one to 6 years as opposed to 3. And I was trying to decide if then we're really achieving any savings further down the line. So that answers that question. And if I may, through to staff, is there any impact on the taxpayer at all doing it the method you're recommending?
Well, certainly. Buying a truck for $1 million or $1.2 million less than what a new one would cost is going to have a benefit to the taxpayer. I realize we'll have to replace this one maybe 3 years earlier than a brand new truck, but that gives us plenty of time to build up the reserve to the required level. And I would feel much better about our reserve levels and not having to do short-term borrowing if we were to buy this used truck.
But in terms of the actual financing, there's no, in the immediate sense, is what I was referring to.
No impact in 2022, but if we had to go out and borrow, there could be a 23 impact for having to not only build up the reserve, but to pay the short-term loan over 5 years.
Do you have any sense of what that might look like in terms of impact?
Probably 1%.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. While Mr. Hick is still there, a question about are we able to get that shortfall that we need from, there was another reserve there that we had up on the screen there. So instead of borrowing, could we pull it out of, I can't remember what it was, another vehicle reserve or general reserve? Is that an option?
It's likely that if we needed to borrow internally, we would take it from a surplus.
Oh, okay. Okay, thanks for that. And back to the chief then for a couple things, if I may, Chair. I would think that, would you think that by getting a used one, that I guess what I'm hearing from with supply chain issues, people are having trouble buying cars and trucks because there's shortage of parts and materials. Factories are not fully staffed. So would I be correct in assuming that even if we did want to get a new one, that there might be a considerable wait time for that?
Through the chair to Councillor Keith, you definitely are correct. You know, in doing our research, you know, prior to, you know, getting to this stage, two very like and comparable departments, one being Qualicum Beach and the other being Duncan, similar positions to ourselves. They both proceeded with purchasing new trucks in 2021, just prior to the calendar year changing, and that resulted in a savings of 5 to 7%. But they both spent well in excess of over 2 to 2.1 million on each of their new vehicles, and they weren't optimized for kind of small downtown environments like ours would require. So yes, and their lead times or delivery times, depending on what they are, range anywhere between 16 to 24 months. So yes, you're correct.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Also, do we get any, is there any market for this used one? Like, does Piers Island need another truck? Do we, is there any cost that we get for that?
Again, through the chair, Councilor Rickey, we are going to, if assuming that this is met favorably by council, we would market our existing truck, being that it's coming up 21, 22 years old. Its value does decrease significantly, but I would market it throughout North America, because the underwriters' requirements are not as rigid or as closely followed, particularly in the United States. So we may find a customer in the Pacific Northwest, somewhere in the U.S., that might find it. They would look at that truck and I think would be quite pleased with it. Very hard to assign a value. I'm going to guess anywhere between $35,000 to $50,000. It may be in excess of that, but you just have to. It's a very unique market, so it's a difficult one to assign any real value to.
And so, if we did whatever we got from that, what's the normal process of dealing with that funds? Would that go back into the fire vehicle reserve fund? Is that how that would be handled?
Yes, absolutely. As Mr. Hissick alluded to, our vehicle replacement fund, the cost of particularly new fire apparatus has grown exponentially. It's extremely expensive. And again, as I kind of alluded to in my staffing report, as the town has grown from, the typical kind of 2,000 square foot kind of Sydney, BC box type of town, to one that boasts, well in excess of a 103 or 4 story, 133 or 4 story or greater buildings. The requirements of the machinery that we have change. For example, the city of Colwood, their annual firefighter replacement reserve is in excess of $350,000 to maintain their fleet. Ours is approximately half. So again, we have a little bit of catching up there to do, but we typically, like Andrew said, we typically get into a deficit position when we have one large procurement, when we usually replace one of our frontline apparatus every approximately 7 to 8 years. And then after that, as we deposit more money into that account, we catch up and end up in a surplus position again.
Okay, thank you. And just one more, if I may, sort of more thinking to the future in terms of our fire trucks and gear and things. And as you just mentioned, the exorbitant cost of some of these things. And I'm looking at, I'm wondering if it's worth considering at some point what your thoughts are about perhaps shared vehicles, or having a shared fire department with North Saanich. If we're investing a huge amount of money in this vehicle, it seems it wouldn't make sense to have 2 of the same thing. Is that something that you think is worth considering at some point?
Again, through the chair, and again, I've made quite clear to council in the past that that there's definitely value, and that's something that should be looked at, particularly at the political level. It makes a ton of sense. We could definitely realize, without incurring additional cost, we could deliver an enhanced service, and there would be some savings, obviously, by do we need as many engines. We would still need a ladder truck, and we would still need a tender, which is something that carries large volumes of water to unhydrated areas, which is unique to North Saanich. But the number of fire halls and engines and other things could be eventually decreased. which would allow for, again, the same amount of staff would be able to provide an enhanced service in less time. So there's definitely a lot to be gained there.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thanks. That's all for me. Thank you.
Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to move the recommendation that the draft 2022 to 2026 financial plan be amended to permit the purchase of a used fire truck in 2022. And I'd like to speak to it after if it's seconded.
Second.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So just for clarity, it's in the at the end of the report, right before the recommendation, that that we would be amending this to an upper limit of 1.3 million, which is up from the 900,000 that we saw in that reserve chart, and that the 2023 budget would be reduced by 1.1 million. I just want to thank the chief for the report and for the diligence in pursuing this option over a considerable period of time. It's resulting in tremendous savings to our community in the future, and it's greatly appreciated. And leave my remarks there.
Is there any further discussion? All right, I will call the question. All in favor? Motion carried. Thank you, everyone. Looks like the last item on our agenda is adjournment. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Call the question. All in favor? All right. Thank you, everyone. Good night.